Chapter 21 of the Marquis de Villemer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Celine Major. The Marquis de Villemer by George Sand. Translated by Ralph Keeler. Chapter 21. At daybreak, Mademoiselle de Saint-Genest was awakened by the hens clucking and scratching around her. She rose and walked on, looking at the doors of the houses as they opened one by one, and saying to herself with reason that in a hamlet so small and stowed so close among the rocks she could not stray far without finding the face she sought. But here a difficulty presented itself. Was she sure of recognizing this nurse, whom she had never seen since she was 10 years old? She had Justine's voice and accent in her memory far more clearly than her face. She followed the ups and downs of the road as far as the last house behind the rock, and there she saw written on the door, Perrac Lagnon. A horseshoe nailed over this sign indicated his occupation of farrier. Justine had risen first, as was her custom, while the closed calico curtains of the bed shaded the last nap of Monsieur Perrac. The principal apartment on this ground floor showed the comfort of a well-to-do household, and the mark of this easy competence consisted particularly in the garniture of the ceiling, which was trellised with racks of monumental supplies of vegetables and divers rural commodities. But the strict cleanliness, a rare deviation from the customs of the country, removed everything which might offend the eye or the sense of smell. Justine was lighting her fire, and preparing to make the soup her husband was to find smoking hot on his awakening, when she saw Mademoiselle de Saint-Genest come in with her hood on, carrying her bundle. She cast a look of perplexity upon the stranger, and said at last, "What have you to sell?" Caroline, hearing Perrac snore behind his curtain, put her finger to her lips and threw her hood back on her shoulders. Justine stood still an instant, suppressed a cry of joy, and opened her stout arms with rapture. She had recognized her child. "Come, come," said she, leading her toward a little break-neck staircase at the farther end of the entry. "Your room is all ready. We have been hoping for you every day this year." And she called to her husband, "Get up, Perrac, at once, and shut the door. Here is news, oh, such good news!" The little chamber, whitewashed and furnished in rustic fashion, was, like the lower room, of irreproachable neatness. The view was magnificent, and blossoming fruit trees came up to the level of the window. "It is a paradise!" exclaimed Caroline to the good woman. "It only needs a little fire, which you are going to make for me. I am cold and hungry, but happy to see you and be with you. I must tell you something first of all. I don't want it known here who I am. My reasons are good ones, and you shall know them. They will meet with your approval. Let us begin by agreeing on our facts. You have lived at Brioude?" "Yes, I was in service there before I was married." "Brioude is a long way from here. Is there any one from that country in Lantriac?" "No one, and strangers never come. There is no road except for ox carts." "I saw that myself. Then you can pass me off for some one you knew at Brioude?" "Very easily. The daughter of my old mistress." "No, I'm not to be a young lady." "But she was not a young lady. She was a little tradeswoman." "That's it. But I must have an occupation." "Wait a minute. That's easy enough. Be a peddler of small wares, like the one I am speaking of." "But then I shall have to sell something." "I'll see to that. Besides, you are supposed to have made your rounds, and I shall have detained you here as a matter of friendship, for you are going to stay." "A month at least." "You must stay always. We will find you something to do, never fear. But let's see, what shall be your name?" "Charlotte. You called me that when I was a little thing; so it will not give you any trouble. I am supposed to be a widow, and you must say thou to me." "Just as I used to. Good. It is agreed. But how will you dress, my dear Charlotte?" "Like this. You see it's not luxurious." "It's not very rich, to be sure; though it will pass. But this lovely blonde hair of yours will attract the eye, and a city bonnet will be a wonder." "I thought of that. So I bought at Brioude one of the head dresses worn there. I have it in my travelling bag, and I'm going to don my costume at once for fear of a surprise." "Then I'll go at once and get you some breakfast. You will eat with Pérac, I take it?" "And with you, I hope. To morrow I mean to help you about the house and in the kitchen." "Oh, you may pretend to do that. I don't want you to spoil those little hands I used to take such care of. Now I'm going to see if Pérac is up, and let him know what has been agreed upon. Then you must tell us why there is need of all this mystery." While talking, Justine had kindled the wood already in the fireplace. She had filled the pitchers with pure cold water which had trickled from the rock, coming through an earthen pipe to the toilet table of her little chamber, and then down into the kitchen sink. This was an invention of Pérac's, who prided himself on having ideas of his own. Half an hour afterward, Caroline, whose simple attire marked no particular station, put up her fine hair under the little head dress from Brioude, less scantily contrived, and more prettily curved than the round dish cover, which, like it, is of black felt trimmed with velvet, worn by the women of Velay. It was all in vain. She was still charming in spite of the weariness that dimmed the large eyes, green like the sea, formerly so bepraised by the marchioness. The soup of rice and potatoes was quickly served in a small room where Pérac at odd moments did a little carpenter work. The good man thought this an unsuitable reception, and wanted to sweep away the shavings. "On the contrary," said his wife, spreading the chips and sawdust over the floor, "you don't understand at all. She will think it a pretty carpet. Oh, you don't know her yet. She is a daughter of the good Providence, this one is." Caroline made acquaintance with Pérac by embracing him. He was a man of about 60 years, still very robust, though thin, of medium height and plain featured, like most of the mountaineers in this region; but that his austere and even stern countenance bore the stamp of integrity was evident at the first glance. His rare smile was remarkably genial. You saw in it real affection and sincerity, which were all the more unmistakable from the fact that they were never lavished demonstratively. Justine also had rigid features and a blunt way of speaking. She was a strong, generous character. An earnest Roman Catholic, she respected the silence of her husband, who was of Protestant descent, nominally converted indeed, but a free thinker if there ever was one. Caroline knew these circumstances, and was touched to see the delicate respect which this superior woman knew how to weave into her love for her husband. It must be remembered that Mademoiselle de Saint Genest, the daughter of a very weak man, and the sister of an inefficient woman, owed the great courage she possessed first to her mother, who was of Cévenol parentage, and afterward to the ideas Justine had given her in early life. She perceived this very clearly when she found herself seated between this old couple whose precise language and notions caused her neither fear nor surprise. It seemed as if the milk of her mountain nurse had passed into her whole being, and as if she were there in the presence of types with which she had already been made familiar in some previous existence. "My friends," said she, when Justine had brought her the cream of the dessert, while Pérac washed down his soup with a draught of hot wine, followed up before long with a draught of black coffee, "I promised to tell you my story, and here it is in a few words. One of the sons of my old lady had some idea of marrying me." "Ah, indeed! That might well be," said Justine. "You are right, because our characters and ideas are alike. Any one ought to have foreseen that, and I myself first of all." "And the mother, too," said Pérac. "Well, no one seems to have thought of it; and the son surprised and even angered the mother when he told her he loved me." "And you?" asked Justine. Why, he never told me of it at all; and as I knew I was not noble enough or wealthy enough for him, I should never have allowed him to think of it." "Yes, that's right," returned Pérac. "And it's true," added Justine. "Then I saw I could not stay a day longer, and at the first angry word from the mother I went away without seeing the son again; but the son would have hurried after me if I had remained with my sister. The marchioness wanted me to stay a little to have an explanation with him, to tell him I did not love him." "That is what ought to have been done, perhaps," said Pérac. Caroline was forcibly impressed by the austere logic of the peasant. "Yes, unquestionably," thought she, "my courage ought to have been pushed thus far." And as she still kept silence, the nurse, enlightened by the penetration of a loving heart, said to her husband sharply, Stop talking there, you! How you run on! How do you know she didn't love him, this poor child?" "Ah, that is another thing," replied Pérac, bowing his serious, thoughtful head, which now looked nobler for the sense of delicate pity expressed upon his face. Caroline was touched in an unspeakable degree by the straightforwardness of this simple friendship, which with one word touched the sorest spot in her wound. What she had not had strength or confidence to tell her sister, she was impelled not to disguise from these hearts so thoroughly true and so able to read her own. "Well, my friends, you are right," said she, taking their hands. "I should not perhaps have been able to lie to you, for in spite of myself I do love him." Hardly had she spoken the words when she was seized with terror, and looked round as if Urbain might have been there to hear them. Then she burst into tears at the thought that he never would hear them. "Courage, my daughter, the Lord will aid you!" exclaimed Pérac, rising. "And we will aid you, too," said Justine, embracing her. "We will hide you, we will love you, we will pray for you." She led her back to her room, undressed her, and made her lie down, with motherly care that she should be warm and not see the sun shining in too early on her bed. Then she went down to apprise her neighbours of the arrival from Brioude of a person named Charlotte, to answer all their questions, mentioning her paleness and her beauty, that these might not strike them too forcibly. She took pains to tell them also that the speech of Brioude was not at all like that of the mountains, so Charlotte would be unable to talk with them. "Ah, the poor creature!" replied the gossips. "She will find it very dull and tiresome with us." A week later, after having informed her sister in the proper time and place of her safe arrival, Caroline gave her some detailed account of her new mode of life. It must not be forgotten that, hiding her actual sorrow, she was trying to reassure her sister, and to divert her own thoughts by affecting an independence far from being so complete or so real as it seemed. "You can form no idea of the care they take of me, these Péracs. Justine is always the same noble woman, with a heart like an angel's, whom you know, and whom our father could not bear to see going away from us. So it is saying more than a little to declare that her husband is worthy of her. He has even more intelligence, although he is slower of comprehension; but what he does understand is as if engraved on marble without spot or blemish. I assure you I am not weary a single moment with them. I could be alone much more than I am, for my little room is free from all intrusion of servants, and I can dream without being disturbed. But I rarely feel the need of this. I am contented among these worthy people. I am conscious of being loved. They have, besides, something of intellectual life, like most of the people here. They inquire about things in the world without, and it is astonishing to find in a kind of blind alley among such wild mountains, a peasantry with so many notions foreign to their own necessities and habits. Their children, their neighbours, and their friends impress me as active, intelligent, and honest, while Pérac tells me it is the same in villages farther still from all civilization. As an offset to this, the dwellers in the little groups of cottages scattered over the mountain, those who are only peasants, shepherds, or labourers, live in an apathy beyond all comprehension. The other day I asked a woman the name of a river which formed a magnificent cascade not more than 100 paces from her house. "That is water," she replied. "But the water has a name, hasn't it?" "I will ask my husband. I don't know myself. We women always call all the rivers water." The husband knew enough to tell me the names of the torrent and the cascade; but when I asked for those of the mountains on the horizon, he said he knew nothing about them, he had never been there. "But you must have heard that those are the Cévennes?" "Perhaps so. The Maisons and the Gerbier de Joncs (sheaf or stack of reeds) are over there, but I don't know which they are." I pointed them out to him. They are easily recognised: Maisons, the loftiest of the peaks, and the Gerbier, an elegant cone which holds in its crater reeds and swamp grasses. Only the good man would not even look. It was all precisely the same to him. He showed me the grottos of the ancient savages, that is, a kind of Gallic or Celtic village hollowed out of the rock, with the same precautions that beasts of the wilderness use to conceal their dens. for you can examine this rock and follow it without discovering anything unusual unless you know the path which penetrates this labyrinth and its habitations. Ah, my dear Camille, am I not here a little like those ancient savages, who, for fear of intrusion, hid themselves in caves and sought their peace in forgetfulness of the whole world? At all events, the inhabitants of La Roche impress me as being the direct descendants of those poor Celts hidden in their rock, as it were, bound to it. I looked at the woman with bare legs and dull eyes who conducted us into the grottos, and asked myself whether 3,000 or 4,000 years had really passed away since her ancestors took root in these stones. You see, I go out, for prudence does not require the indoor life which you feared for me. On the contrary, having nothing to read here, I feel the need of strolling about, and my movements surprise the good people of Lantriac much less than a mysterious retreat would do. I run no risk of meeting strangers. You saw me set out in clothing that would not attract attention in the least. Besides, I have a black felt hat, larger than those worn here, which shades my face quite nicely. In case of need, too, I can conceal it entirely under the brown hood I brought with me, which the capricious weather gives me an excuse for wearing in my walks. I am not just like the women of the country, but there is nothing in my appearance to create a sensation in the places where I go. Then, too, I have a pretext for going out, which accounts for everything. Justine has a little trade in small wares and gives me charge of a box whose contents I offer for sale, while Pérac, who is a farrier, busies himself with visiting sick animals. This enables me to go into the houses and observe the manners and customs of the country. I sell but little, for the women are so absorbed in their lace-making that they never mend for their husbands, their children, or themselves. Here is the triumph of rags worn with pride. Their devotion to their one occupation is so passionate as to exclude all material well-being and all cleanliness even, as a profane superfluity. Avarice finds its account in this, and vanity also, for if Justine gave me jewelry to sell, I should soon have customers more eager for that than for linen and shoes. They produce all those marvellous black and white laces which you have seen Justine make at our house. It is wonderful to see, here among the mountains, this fairy-like work coming from the hands of these poor creatures, and the trifling sum they realize shocks the traveller. They would cheerfully give you for 20 sous what they ask 20 francs for in Paris, if they were allowed to trade with the consumer; but this is strictly forbidden. Under the pretext of having furnished silk, thread, and patterns, the dealer monopolizes and sets a price on their work. In vain you offer to supply the peasant woman with materials and pay her well. The poor woman sighs, looks at the money, shakes her head, and replies that she will not risk losing the patronage of her master in order to profit by the liberality of a person who will not employ her permanently, and whom she may possibly never see again. And then all these women are pious, or pretend to be so. Those who are sincere have sworn by the Virgin and the saints not to sell to individuals, and one is forced to honour their respect for a promise given. Those who make religion a regular profession, and I see there are more such than one would suppose, are conscious of being always under the hand and beneath the eye of the priests, nuns, monks, and seminarists, with whom this country is literally sown and covered even in the most uninhabitable places. The convents have the work done, and here as elsewhere under conditions of trade still more lucrative than those of the dealers. You can see in the vestibules of the churches even, the women from the village in a sort of community sitting in a circle, making their bobbins fly as they murmur litanies or chant offices in Latin; which does not, however, prevent them from gazing curiously at the passers-by and exchanging remarks, while they reply ora pro nobis to the grey, black, or blue sister who oversees the work and the psalmody. These women are generally kind and hospitable. Their children interest me, and when I find those who are ill I am glad to be able to point out the more simple attentions that should be given them. There is either great ignorance or great indifference on this point. Maternity here is rather passionate than tender. It is as if they told you that children are created for the single purpose of learning how to suffer. Pérac's business, as his services are much in demand, leads us into some almost inaccessible places on the mountain, giving me a chance to see the finest landscapes in the world, for this wonderful country is like a dream. And my own life is a strange dream also, is it not? Our fashion of going in search of adventures is quite primitive. Pérac has a little cart, which he is pleased to denominate a carriage, because it has an awning of canvas which somewhat ambitiously pretends to shelter us. He harnesses to this vehicle now an intrepid little mule, and now a pony, spirited but gentle, all skin and bone like its owner, but like him too, never flinching at anything. So while Justine's eldest son, just returned from the regiment, where he has been shoeing artillery horses, continues his trade under the paternal roof, his father and I wander over hill and vale without regard to the weather. Justine pretends this does me so much good that I must stay with her always, and vows she will find some way for me to earn our livelihood without humiliating myself to serve any great lady. Alas, I never felt humiliated so long as I knew I was loved. And then I loved so sincerely in return. Do you know it saddens me no longer to receive a blessing every morning from that poor old marchioness, and not only so, but I am quite uneasy, alarmed about her even, as if I felt she could not live without me. God grant she may soon forget me, that my place may already have been filled by one less fatal than I to her peace. But will she be cared for, morally speaking, as I cared for her? Will her fanciful whims be understood, the dullness of her leisure hours charmed away, or her children spoken of as she loves to hear them spoken of? On my arrival here, I drank in the free air with long breaths. I gazed at this grand, rugged scenery which I had felt so strong a wish to know. I said to myself, here I am, then, free. I shall go where I please. I will talk as little as I please. I shall no longer write the same letter 10 times a day to 10 different people. I shall not live in a hothouse. I shall not breathe the sharp perfumes of flowers distilled by chemical processes, or of plants half dead on the window sills. I shall drink from the breeze hawthorn and wild thyme in their real fragrance. Yes, I said all this to myself, and I could not rejoice. I saw my poor friend sad and lonely, perhaps weeping for having made me weep so much. But she chose this, and to all appearance it was necessary. I have no right to blame her for a moment of unjust anger. The mother thought only of her son, and such a son well deserves all a mother's sacrifice. Perhaps she calls me hard and ungrateful for not falling in with her plans, and I often ask myself if I ought not to have fallen in with them. But I always answer that the end would not have been attained. The Marquis de V is not one of those men who can be sent off with a few commonplaces of cool disdain. Besides, you have no right to act thus toward one who, far from declaring his passion, has surrounded you with respect and delicate affection. In vain I seek some language, half cold, half tender, which I might have used in telling him that I hold his mother's happiness and his own equally sacred. I do not find in myself the requisite tact or skill. Either the real friendship I have for him would have deceived him as to my feelings, leading him to think I was sacrificing myself to a sense of duty, or my firmness would have offended him, as if I were parading a virtue whose aid he has never given me occasion to invoke. No, no, it could not be. It ought not to be. I have an impression that the Marchioness hinted that I might tell him I had an engagement, another love. For heaven's sake, let her invent all she will now. Let her sacrifice my life, and that which I hold still more sacred if need be. I have left the field clear. But for my own part, I could never have improvised a romance for the occasion. And would he have been duped by it? Camille, you will see him. You have doubtless already seen him again since that first visit, when you admitted it was hard for you to play your part. You say it made you very unhappy to see him. He was almost distracted. He is certainly calm now. He has so much moral strength, he will understand so well that I must never see him again. However, be on your guard. He is very keen. Tell him my nature is a cold one. No, no, not that. He wouldn't believe it. But speak of my invincible pride. That is true. Yes, I am proud. I feel it. And if I were not, should I deserve his affection? Perhaps it would have been liked if I had become really unworthy of his regard. Not the mother. Not she. No, never. She is too upright, too pious, too pure in heart. But the duke, I mean. Now I can recall a number of things which I did not understand, and they appear in a new light. The Duke is excellent. He worships his brother. I believe his wife, who is an angel, will purify his life and thoughts. But at Ceval, when he told me to save his brother at any cost, I think of it now, and I blush to think of it. Ah, that I might be allowed to disappear, that I might be allowed to forget all! For a year I believed myself calm, worthy, happy. One day, 1 hour, has spoiled the whole. With one word, Madame de Villemer has poisoned all the memories I had hoped to carry away unsoiled, memories which now I dare not dwell upon. In truth, Camille, you were right in saying, as you sometimes did, that one should not be too ingenuous, that I ventured out into life too quixotically. This will serve me as a lesson, and I will renounce friendship as well as love. I ask myself why I should not from this time onward break off all relations with a world so full of dangers and snares, why I should not accept my misery more bravely indeed than I have done. I could create some resources in this province even, remote as it is in point of civilization. I could not be a schoolmistress, as Justine imagined last year. The clergy have usurped everything here, and the good sisters would not let me teach, even in Lantriac. But in a city I could find pupils, or I could become a bookkeeper in some mercantile house. First of all, I must make sure of being forgotten there. But when this oblivion is complete, I must indeed take thought for our children, and I dwell upon this a little in advance. After all, be at ease. I will find something. I shall manage to conquer the malicious fates. I do not sleep, I cannot falter. You know this perfectly. You have enough to live on for 2 months more, and I need absolutely nothing here. Do not worry, let us always trust the good God, as you, for your part, must trust the sister who loves you. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of the Marquis de Villemer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Celine Major. The Marquis de Villemer by George Sand. Translated by Ralph Keeler. Chapter 22. Caroline had reason to be alarmed by the inquiries M. de Villemer was making at her sister's. He had already returned twice to Étampes, and, fully aware that delicacy forbade anything like a system of cross-questioning, he confined himself to watching the demeanour of Camille, and drawing his own inferences from her silent evasions. Thenceforth he might take it for granted that Madame Hudebert knew her sister's hiding-place, and that Caroline's disappearance gave her no real uneasiness. Camille held in reserve the letter which said Caroline had found employment away from France, and did not produce it. She saw such anguish and distress in the features of the Marquis, which were already much changed, that she dared not inflict this last blow on the benefactor, the protector of her children. Besides, Madame Hudebert did not share all Caroline's scruples or comprehend all her pride. She had not ventured to blame her in this regard, but she herself would not have held it so great a crime to brave the displeasure of the Marchioness a little, and become her daughter-in-law notwithstanding. Since the intentions of the Marquis were so serious, thought she, and his mother loves him so that she dare not oppose him openly, and finally, since he is of age and master of his own fortune, I don't see why Caroline could not have used her influence over the old lady, her powers of persuasion, and the evidence of her own worth, and so led her gently to admit the propriety of the marriage. There! Poor Caroline, with all her valiant devotedness, is too romantic, and will go away and kill herself in order to support us; while, with a little patient tact, she might be happy and make us all happy too. Here is another common-sense opinion which may be set over against that of Pérac and Justine. Of these two lines of reasoning the reader is free to adopt the one that he prefers; but the narrator must, of necessity, hold an opinion also, and he avows a little partiality for that of Caroline. The Marquis perceived that Madame Hudebert made now and then some timid allusions to the state of things, and felt sure she knew the whole. He threw himself on her mercy a little more than he had done hitherto; and Camille, encouraged, asked him, with a sufficient want of tact, whether, in case the Marchioness proved inexorable, he was fully resolved to make Caroline an offer of his hand. She seemed on the point of betraying her sister's secret, if the Marquis would pledge his word of honour. The Marquis replied without hesitation: "If I was sure of being loved, if the happiness of Mademoiselle de Saint Genès depended on my courage, I would contrive to do away with my mother's prejudices at any cost. But you give me no encouragement. Only give me that, and you will see." "I give you encouragement!" exclaimed Camille, amazed and confused. She hesitated to reply. She had indeed divined Caroline's secret; but the latter had always guarded it proudly, not by falsehood, but by never allowing herself to be questioned; and Madame Hudebert had not the daring to inflict a severe wound on her sister's dignity, by taking it upon herself to compromise her. "That is something I am no wiser about than you," said she. "Caroline has a strong character, one which I cannot always fathom." "And this strength of hers is so great," said the Marquis, "that she would never accept my name without my mother's sincere benediction. This I know better even than you do. So tell me nothing, it is for me alone to act. I ask of you only one thing more, and that is to let me watch over you and your children until something new shall occur, and even yes, I will venture to say it, I am haunted by the fear that Mademoiselle de Saint Genès may find herself without resources, exposed to privations which it makes me shudder to think of. Spare me this dread. Let me leave you a sum which you can return if there is no use for it, but which in case of need you will remit to her as coming from yourself." "Oh, that is quite impossible," replied Camille. "She would divine the source and never forgive me for having taken it." "I see you are really afraid of her." "Just as I am of all that commands respect." "Then we feel alike," replied the Marquis, as he took leave. "I am so thoroughly afraid of her that I dare not seek her any farther, and yet I must find her again or die." Shortly afterwards the Marquis drew an explanation from his mother which was painful enough to both of them. Although he saw her suffering, sad, regretting Caroline 100 times more than she admitted, and although he had resolved to await a more propitious moment for his inquiries, the explanation came, in his own despite and in despite of the Marchioness, through the fatality of circumstances. The anxiety of the situation was too intense; it could not be prolonged. Madame de Villemer confessed that she had conceived a sudden prejudice against the character of Mademoiselle de Saint Genès, and at the very moment of fulfilling her promise she had let Caroline feel the exceeding pain it caused her. Gradually, under the eager questioning of the Marquis, the conversation grew more animated, and Madame de Villemer, pushed to extremity, allowed the accusation against Caroline to escape her. The unfortunate girl had committed a fault pardonable in the eyes of the Marchioness when acting as her friend and guardian, but one which made it quite out of the question even to think of receiving her as a daughter. Before this result of calumny the Marquis did not flinch one instant. "It is an infamous lie!" he cried, beside himself. "A base lie! And you could believe it! Then it must have been very artful and very audacious. Mother, you must tell me all, for I am not disposed to be taken in so myself." "No, my son, I shall tell you no more," replied Madame de Villemer, firmly; "and every word you add to those you have just uttered I shall consider a breach of filial affection and respect." So the Marchioness remained impenetrable. She had promised not to betray Léonie; and besides, nothing in the world would tempt her to sow the seeds of discord between her two sons. The duke had so often told her, in Urbain's presence, that he had never sought or obtained a single kind look from Caroline. This, in the opinion of the Marchioness, was a falsehood the Marquis would never pardon. She knew now that he had taken the duke into his confidence, and that Gaétan, touched by his grief, had persuaded his wife into taking measures for seeking Caroline in all the Parisian convents. "He does not speak," said the Marchioness to herself. "He will not dissuade his wife and brother from this folly, when he ought, at the very least, to have confessed the past to the Marquis in order to cure him of it. It is too late now to risk such avowals. I cannot do it without leading my two sons to kill each other after having loved so warmly." Meanwhile Caroline wrote her sister as follows: "You feel alarmed because I am in so uneven and rocky a region, and ask what can be fine enough to make one run the risk of being killed at every step. First of all, there is really no danger here for me under the guidance of this good Pérac. The roads that would be actually frightful, and as I think impassable for carriages like those with which we are familiar, are just large enough for the little carts of this region. Then, too, Pérac is very prudent. When he cannot measure with his eye just precisely the space he needs, he has a method of ascertaining it, which made me laugh heartily the first time I saw him put it in practice. He trusts me with the reins, jumps to the ground himself, takes his whip, which has the exact size of his cart, marked with a little notch on its stalk, and advancing a few paces on the road, he proceeds to measure the width of the passage between the rock and the precipice, sometimes between one precipice on the right and another on the left. If the road has a centimetre more than is needful, he comes back triumphant, and we go quickly by. If we have no such centimetre in which to disport ourselves, he makes me alight, while he leads the horse by the bridle, dragging on the carriage. When we find two little walls hemming in a footpath, we place one wheel on either wall and the horse in the pathway. I assure you one soon becomes accustomed to all this, and already I think no more about it. The horses here have no vicious tricks, and are not inclined to shy. They know the danger as well as we, and accidents are no more frequent in this country than they are on the plains. I certainly exaggerated the danger of these jaunts in my first letters. It was from vanity or a lingering fear, of which I am wholly cured now that I feel it was groundless. As to the beauty of Velay, I could never describe it for you. I did not dream there could be, here in the heart of France, a country so strange and so imposing. It is far more lovely than Auvergne, through which I passed on my way hither. The city of Le Puy is probably unique in point of location. It is perched upon masses of lava that seem to spring up from its very heart and form a part of its architecture. These lava pyramids are indeed the edifices of giants; but those which man has placed on their sides, and often on their summits, have certainly been inspired by the grandeur and wildness of the spot. The cathedral is admirable in the Romanesque style, of the same colour as the rocks, but slightly enlivened by the blue and white mosaics on the pediments of its façade. It is placed so as to seem colossal, for to reach it you must climb a mountain of dizzy steps. The interior is sublime in its elegant strength and solemn dimness. I never understood the terrors of the Middle Ages, or felt them, so to speak, as I did under these bare, black pillars, beneath these storm-laden domes. There was a furious tempest while I was there. The flashes sent their infernal lights across the splendid windows that strew the walls and pavements with jewels. The thunders seemed rolling forth from the sanctuary itself. It was Jehovah in all his wrath. But it gave me no alarm. The true God whom we love to-day has no menaces for the weak. I prayed there with a perfect faith, and felt it had done me good. As for these beautiful temples of the faith in ages both rude and stern, it is clear they are the expression of the one grand word mystery, whose veil it was forbidden to lift. If Monsieur de Villemer had been there, he would have said— But a course of history and religious philosophy is not the point now. The ideas of Monsieur de Villemer are no longer the book from which I may study the past or learn to anticipate the future. You see, thanks to good Pérac and his desire to show me the marvels of Velay, thanks also to my impenetrable hood, I have ventured into the city and its suburbs. The city is everywhere picturesque. It is still a medieval town, closely studded with churches and convents. The cathedral is flanked by a whole world of ancient structures where, under mysterious arcades, and in the turns and twists of the rock they stand on, you can see cloisters, gardens, staircases, and mute shadows gliding by, hidden beneath veil and cassock. A strange silence reigns there, and a certain odour of the past, I know not what, which makes one shiver with fear, not of our God, the source of all confidence and spiritual freedom, but of everything that, in the name of God, breaks up for ever the ties and duties of our common humanity. In our convent, I remember a religious life seemed cheerful. Here it is sombre enough to make one tremble. From the cathedral you must keep going downhill for an hour to reach the Faubourg des Guilles, where another monument rears its head, which is natural and historic at one and the same time, and, indeed, the most curious thing in the world. It is a volcanic sugar loaf 300 feet in height, which you mount by a spiral stairway until you reach a Byzantine chapel, necessarily quite small, but charming, and built, it is said, on the site and from the fragments of a temple to Diana, A legend is current here which struck me forcibly. A young girl, a Christian virgin, pursued by some miscreant, flung herself to escape him down the top of the terrace. She arose at once. She was unharmed. The miracle was noised abroad. She was declared a saint. Pride grew strong in her heart. She promised to hurl herself down again, to show she was under the protection of angels. But this time heaven deserted her, and she was crushed like a vain, silly creature as she was. Pride. Yes, God leaves the proud to themselves, and without him what can they do? But do not tell me that I am proud. No, it is not pride. I have no desire to prove anything to anyone. I ask to be forgotten, and that there should be no suffering on my account. There is near Le Puy, forming a part of its magnificent landscape, a village that also crowns one of those singular isolated rocks which break through the soil here at every step. It is called Espaly, and this rock also bears up the ruins of a feudal castle and of Celtic grottos. One of these caves is inhabited by 2 persons, aged and poor, whose squalid misery is heart-rending. This couple live here in the solid rock with a single hole for chimney and window. At night they block up the door in winter with straw; in summer with the old woman's petticoat. A small rude bed, without coverlids or mattress, 2 stools, a little iron lamp, a spinning wheel, and 2 or 3 earthen pots, these are all the furniture. Nevertheless, only a few paces from them there is a vast and splendid house belonging to the Jesuits and named the Paradise. At the foot of the rock flows a brook which brings down precious stones in its sand. The old woman sold me for 20 sous a handful of garnets, sapphires, and jacinths, which I am keeping for Lily. The stones are too small to have any actual value, but there must be a precious deposit somewhere among these rocks. The Jesuit fathers will find it, perhaps. I don't expect to make the discovery myself, however, so I must think about procuring some work. Pirac has an idea which he has enlarged upon for the last few days, and which was suggested to him by this very rock of Espaly. I will tell you how. While strolling about over this rock, I was taken with one of my sudden fancies for a little child, playing in the lap of a pretty woman from the village who was strong and cheerful. This child, you see, I can compare with no one but our Charlie for inspiring affection. He does not look like Charlie, but has the same demure playfulness, and the shy caresses which make one his willing slave. When I called upon Pirac to admire him, remarking how clean he was kept, and that his mother made no lace, but seemed wholly taken up with him, as if she knew she had a treasure there, Pirac at once replied, "You have come nearer the truth than you thought. This child is a treasure for Dame Roquebert. If you ask who he is, she will tell you it is the child of a sister she has in Clermont. But this is not true. The little one has been placed in her charge by a gentleman whom no one knows, who pays her for rearing it, who pays her, besides, for taking great care of it, as if it were the son of a prince. So you see this woman is well dressed and does not work. She was in easy circumstances before. Her husband has charge of the castle of Polignac, whose great tower, and in fact all the ruined portion, you can see over yonder, on a rock larger and loftier than that of Espaly. That is where she lives, and if you meet her here, it is because now she has such fine chances for pleasure strolls. The real mother of the little one must be dead, for she has never been heard of. But the father comes to see it, leaves money, and stipulates that it shall not be allowed to want for anything. You see, dear sister, this is a romance. That is partly what attracted me, perhaps, since according to your ideas I am quite romantic. Certainly this little boy has something about him which captivates the imagination. He is not strong. They say when he first came here, he had hardly life enough to breathe. But now he is quite blooming, and the mountain air agrees with him so well that his father, who came here at about this time last year to take him away, decided to leave him a year longer in order to have him regain his strength completely. The little creature has an angelic face, dreamy eyes, with a far-off look in them, strange in a child of his age, and there is a wondrous grace in all his ways." Pirac, seeing me so bewitched, scratched his head with an air of profundity, and continued, "Well, tell me then, since you are fond of little children, Why, instead of making it your occupation to read aloud, which must be wearisome, do you not find a little pupil like that, whom you could educate at your sister's, with the other children? This would leave you in your own home, and to your own ways." "You forget, my good Pérac, that perhaps it will be long before I can go to my sister." "Well, then, your sister might come and live here, or else you could stay with us for a year or two. My wife would aid you in taking care of the child, and you would only have the trouble of watching over him and teaching him. Stop! I have an idea of my own about this child, since he pleases you so that you are doting on him already. His father will come after him one of these days. Suppose I should tell him about you?" "Then you are acquainted with him?" "I acted as driver for him once, and carried him to the mountain in my carriage. He seems a fine man, but too young to take upon himself the bringing up of a child of 3 years. He will have to place it in charge of some woman, and he cannot leave it any longer with the Roqueberts, for they are not capable of teaching what a young gentleman like him ought to know. This would be your own task especially, and the father would never find so good a mother for his child. Hope, hope, which signifies wait. I will keep watch at Polignac, and as soon as this father arrives I will manage to talk with him in the proper way." I let good Pérac cultivate this project, and Justine also, but I have no faith in it myself, for the mysterious personage expected will ask questions I am unwilling to have answered, unless I am quite sure he knows none of the people, either intimately or remotely, from whom my place of retreat must be concealed. And how could I make sure of that? Pérac's idea is nevertheless in itself a good one. To educate some child at home for a few years would please me infinitely better than going into a strange family again. I would rather take a girl than a boy, as she would be left with me a longer time; but there will be little room for choice, for these children hidden away by their parents are not easy to find. And there must needs be the most perfect confidence in me. I must be well recommended. Madame d'Arglade, who knows all the secrets of fashionable life, could find for me a chance like this. But I would rather not apply to her. Without intending to do so, she might bring upon me some fresh misfortune. Chapter 22.
Chapter 23 of the Marquis de Villemer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Marquis de Villemer by George Sand, translated by Ralph Keeler. Chapter 23. A few days later, Caroline wrote again to her sister. Polignac, May 15. Here I have been for 5 days past, in one of the most imposing ruined castles left from the feudal times, on the summit of a great black lava boulder, like those I told you about in connection with Le Puy and Esplay. You will think my position has changed, and my dream has become a reality. No, I am certainly near little Didier, but I have taken it upon myself to watch over him, for his father or protector has not yet appeared. Now see what has happened. I felt a wish to see the child again, besides a slight wish to learn more about him, and, lastly, I had a desire to examine closely this castle of Polignac, which looks from afar like a city of giants on a rock from the infernal depths. It is the strongest medieval fortress in the country. It was the nest of the terrible race of vultures under whose ravages Valais, Forez, and Auvergne have trembled. The ancient lords of Polignac have left everywhere throughout these provinces mementos and traditions worthy of the legends about the ogre and Bluebeard. These feudal tyrants robbed travelers, pillaged churches, murdered the monks, carried off women, and set fire to villages, and this, too, from father to son, through long centuries. The Marquis de Villemer worked out of these facts one of the most remarkable chapters of his book, drawing the conclusion that the descendants of this family, though innocent, assuredly, of the crimes of their ancestors, seemed by their misfortunes to have been expiating the triumphs of barbarism. Their citadel was impregnable. The rock is sliced down perpendicularly on all sides. The village forms a group below on the little hill which supports the block of lava. It is some distance from Lantriac. The insuperable ravines here make all distances great. Having started early, however, we arrived last Tuesday toward noon, and our little horse carried us to the foot of the postern. Peyrec left me there in order to take care of our animal and to look at some others, for he has quite a reputation in veterinary science, and wherever he goes, practice of this kind always comes to him. I found a little girl of 10 years of age to open the door for me, but when I asked to see Dame Roquebert, the child told me with tears that her mother was dying. I hurried to where she lives, a part of the castle still standing, in good repair, and I found her the victim of a brain fever. Little Didier was playing about the room with another of this poor woman's children. The latter child was quite happy, comprehending nothing although the elder, while Didier, between smiles and tears, was looking toward the bedside with as much anxiety as a little creature of 3 years could be expected to show. When he caught sight of me, he came to me at once, and without coquetting before embracing me, as he did the first time, he clung to my dress, pulling me with his little hands and saying, "Mamma," in a voice so plaintive and gentle that my whole heart was won by it. He was certainly telling me about the strange condition of his adopted mother. I drew near the bed. Dame Roquebert could not speak. She knew no one. Her husband came in after a moment and began to be alarmed, for she had been in this state only a few hours. I told him it was time to send for a physician and a woman to take care of his wife, which he did at once. And as I could not be sure that it was not typhoid fever, I sent the children out of the room, warning the husband that it might be dangerous to leave them there. When the physician came at the expiration of 2 hours, he approved what I had done, observing that the disease had not yet defined itself, and that the children must be placed in some other house. This change I undertook to make with the help of Peyrec, for the husband had quite lost his senses, and thought of nothing but having candles burnt in the village church, and prayers mumbled in Latin, which he could not understand, but which seemed to him of more efficacy than the doctor's prescriptions. When he had calmed down a little, it was already 4 o'clock, and it was necessary for Peyrec to set out again with me, that the night might not overtake us in the ravine of the Gagne. There was no moon for the moment, and a storm was impending. Then poor Roquebert began to lament, saying that he was ruined unless someone would take care of the children, and especially the child, meaning by that Didier, the hen with the golden eggs for his household. Special care was needful for him. He was not strong like the children of the country, and besides he was curious. He wanted to go everywhere, and these ruins are a labyrinth of precipices, where a young gentleman of this adventurous temper must not be lost sight of a single moment. He dared not trust him with anyone. The money this little one had brought into his house had made others envious. He had enemies. What did I know about it? In short, Peyrec said to me in a low voice, "Come, your good heart and my own bright ideas are at one in this matter. Remain here. I see they have the wherewith to lodge you comfortably. I will come back tomorrow to see how the case stands, and take you home if there is no further need of you." I confess I desired this decision. It seemed as if it were a duty, as well as a privilege, to watch over the child. Peyrec returned the next day, and as I saw that Dame Roquebert, though out of danger, would not be able to sit up for some days, I consented to remain, telling Peyrec not to come after me till the end of the week. I am very comfortable here in a vast room, which is, I believe, an old hall for the guards, that has been divided into several portions for the use of the farmers. The beds, though very rustic, are clean, and the housekeeping I attend to myself. I have the 3 children at my side all the time. The little girl does the cooking while I superintend. I see to the attendance which must be given the mother. I wash and dress Didier myself. He is clothed like the others in a little blue blouse, but with more care, especially since I have made it my concern, and I am so fond of him that I dread the moment when I shall have to leave him. You know my passion for children. That is, for some children. This one is certainly well born. Charlie would be as jealous of him as a tiger, because, you see, this Didier is surely the son of a superior man or woman. He is of high, fine descent, morally speaking. His face is of a somewhat dull whiteness, with little flushes of color like those on standard roses. He has brown eyes of admirable shape and expression, and a forest of black hair, half inclined to curl, which is fine and soft as silk. His little hands are perfect, and he never soils them. He does not dig in the earth, and never touches anything. He passes his life in looking at things. I am sure he has thoughts beyond his years which he cannot express, or rather, a series of dreams, charming and divine, that cannot be translated into human language. Yet he talks very fluently for one of his age, both in French and patois. He has caught the accent of the country, but makes it very sweet by his infantile lisp. He has the prettiest reasons in the world for doing as he pleases, and what he pleases is to be out of doors, climbing over the ruins, or crawling into their crevices. Once there, he sits down, gazing at the tiny flowers, and especially at the insects, without touching them, but following all their emotions, apparently interested in these living marvels, while the other children think only of crushing and destroying them. I have tried to give him his first notion in reading, being persuaded, contrary to the father's opinion perhaps, that the earlier you begin with children, the more you spare them the heavy strain on the attention, so painful when their strength and activity have found greater development. I have tested his intelligence and curiosity. They are unusual, and with our wonderful method which we succeeded so well with your children, I am sure I could teach him to read in a month. And then this child is all soul, and his self-will melts into boundless affection. Our fondness is growing too fast, really, and I ask myself how we are ever going to part. Besides, although I miss my Justine and Peyrac, I enjoy myself exceedingly among these magnificent ruins, commanding, as they do, one of the loveliest spots on earth. The air is so pure that the white stones, mixed with rough fragments of lava, are as bright as if just from a quarry. And then the interior of this immense castle is stored with very curious things. You must know that the Polniak family pretend to a descent from Apollo, or his priests in a direct line. And that tradition consecrates the existence here of a temple to this god, a temple of which some fragments yet remain. As for myself, I think there is no doubt of it, and that just to see these fragments is enough. The question to decide is whether the inscriptions and carvings were brought here to decorate the castle according to Renaissance usage, or whether the castle was built upon these vestiges. Dame Rothwell tells me the scientific men of the country have been disputing over it for 50 years. And for my own part, I agree with those who think the curbstone of the well was the mouthpiece of the god's oracles. The orifice of this immense well, with which another and a smaller well grotesquely communicates, was closed by a colossal head of noble outline, whose perforated mouth gave forth the subterranean voice of the priestess. Why not? Those who say it was only the mask of a fountain are no surer. The head has been preserved from destruction in the lower story of a little tower, along with a pile of stone bullets found in the well. I have amused myself by taking a sketch of it, which I send you in this letter, with a portrait of my little Didier at its foot, lying sound asleep at full length upon the temple of the god. It does not look like him, to be sure, but it will give you an idea of the fantastic and charming picture which I have had before my eyes for the last 15 minutes. As for the other matters, I do not read at all here. I have not Peyrac's 8 or 10 stray volumes, and his big old Protestant Bible. I no longer try to improve myself. I hardly think of it even. I mend the clothing of my Didier, following him step by step. I dream, I am sad but not rebellious, and not given to wondering any further about a state of things to which I ought to submit. And I am in good health, which is the most important thing. Good old Peyrac comes in, bringing your letter. Ah, my sister, do not give up weakly, or I shall be in despair. You say he is pale, already ill, and this gave you so much pain that you came near betraying me. Camilla, if you have not strength enough to see a courageous man suffer, and if you do not understand that my courage alone can support his, I will set out again. I will go farther away still, and you shall not know where I am. Consider yourself notified that the day I see the mark of a strange foot upon the sand of my island, I shall disappear so entirely that— Caroline left the sentence unfinished. Peyrac, who had just given her Madame Hautbert's letter, came back, saying, "Here is the gentleman coming." "Who? What?" cried Caroline, rising and evidently quite troubled. "What gentleman?" "The father of the unknown child, Monsieur Bernier, he calls himself." "Then you know his name? No one here knew it, or would tell it." On my word, I am not very curious, but he threw his valise on a bench at Roquebert's door, and my eye happened to fall upon it, so I read. Bernier? I don't know any such person. Perhaps I might show myself without getting into difficulty. Why, certainly you must see him, to tell him about the little one. Now is the time. Roquebert came in, however, and defeated Peyrac's design. Monsieur Bernier was asking for his son, but according to his custom he had gone into a room reserved for him especially, and did not wish, just then, to see anyone not of the family. It is all the same, added Roquebert. I will tell him how you took care of my wife and the little boy, and he will certainly give me something good to repay you with. Otherwise I will do it myself, out of my own pocket. Be easy about that. He took the child in his arms and went out, closing the door behind him, as if to shut out even a curious look from following him into the passage leading to the stranger's room. Well, let us set out, said Caroline, whose eyes were full of tears at the thought that she would probably never see Didier again. No, replied Peyrac. Let us wait a little and see what the gentleman will think, when he knows you have stayed here 5 days to take care of his child. But don't you see, my friend, that Roquebert will take care not to tell him? He will never dare to own that during his wife's illness he knew of nothing better than trusting the child to a stranger. And beside, is he not anxious to keep Didier a year longer, which would be very feasible? Will he let us give the father a hint that the child would not only be better cared for with us, but also educated as he needs to be at his age? No, Dame Roquebert herself, in spite of the care I've given her, will say that no one knows me, that perhaps I am only an adventuress, and while seeking gratitude and confidence, we shall look as if we were intriguing to get the few sous which have been offered us already. But when we refuse them, it will be seen who we are. I am known myself. It is understood that Samuel Peyrac has never lied or held out his hand for money. This stranger knows nothing of that, and he will inquire of the Roqueberts only because he knows nobody else. Let me set out quickly, my dear friend. I suffer every minute I stay here. Just as you like, said Peyrac. I have not unharnessed, and we can let the horse rest at Le Puy. But nevertheless, if you would trust me, we should remain here 1 or 2 hours. Going thither from here, we would naturally meet on the way. The child would come to you and ask for you himself. He is so fond of you already. Look here now. If the gentleman should see you only 1 minute, I am sure he would say, here is a person who is like no one else. I must speak to her. And when he had talked with you... Arguing in this way, Peyrac followed Caroline, who had gathered up her clothing and was turning her steps toward the castle gate, quite determined to start. Passing before the bench, where the stranger's valise was still lying beside his traveling cloak, she read the name which Peyrac had reported faithfully. But at the same time she made a gesture of surprise and hurried along with unusual agitation. "What is it now?" asked the good man, taking the reins. "Nothing. A fancy," replied Caroline, when they were out of the enclosure. "I imagined I recognized the hand of the person who wrote the name of Bernier on that valise." "Bah! It was written just like print." "That is true. I am silly. Never mind, let us go on, my good Peyrac." Caroline was absorbed in thought all the way. She accounted for the singular emotion which the sight of the disguised handwriting had caused her by what she had just experienced in reading her sister's letter, but she had a new anxiety. Monsieur de Villemer had never told her that he had seen the castle of Pognac with his own eyes, but he had given a fine description of it, and an accurate one in his book. He had taken it as an example of the strength of a feudal restoration in the Middle Ages, and Caroline knew he often travelled into the provinces in order to get a distinct impression of historical places. She searched all the recesses of her memory to find what could not possibly be there, to see if the Marquis had not accidentally chanced to tell her that he had visited Pognac. "No," replied she to herself, "if he had said so, I should have been impressed by it on account of the names L'Entraillac and Le Puy, which Justine had mentioned." Then she tried to remember whether, in connection with Pognac, she had not spoken of L'Entraillac and Justine, but she had never mentioned either of them to him. She was quite sure, so she grew calmer. Yet she was agitated and thoughtful. Why had she taken such a fancy to this unknown child? What was the peculiarity in his eyes, his attitude, and his smile? Was it that he looked like the Marquis? In the idea which had so suddenly presented itself of educating a little child and wishing for this one, might there not have been a vague instinct more powerful than chance or Pérec's instigations? With all this uneasiness there came, too, in Caroline's despite, the secret torment of a confused jealousy. "He has a son, then a child of love?" said she to herself. "He must then have loved some woman passionately before he knew me, for frivolous adventures are incompatible with his exclusive nature. And there has been an important mystery in his past life. The mother is still living, perhaps. Why is she supposed to be dead?" Advancing among these feverish speculations, she recalled the words of the Marquis under the cedar in the Jardin des Plantes, and the struggle she had caught a glimpse of between his filial duty and some other duty, some other love, of which she herself might not be the object after all. Who knew whether the old Marchioness had not been equally at fault, whether the Marquis had told his mother the name of the person he wanted to marry, in short, whether she herself and Madame de Villemer had not both missed the truth? Thus working herself into an involuntary excitement, Caroline strove in vain to feel reconciled to her fate. She loved, and for her the strongest feeling now was the fear rather than the hope of not being loved in return. "What is the trouble?" asked Pérac, who had learned to read her anxieties in her face. She replied by overwhelming him with questions about this Monsieur Bernier whom he had seen once. Pérac had a keen eye and a memory, but habitually thoughtful and reserved. He bestowed his attention only on people who especially interested him. He drew then a picture of this pretended Bernier so vague and incomplete that Caroline had no progress. She slept poorly that night, but toward morning she grew calm and awoke saying to herself that there had been no common sense in her excitement of the day before. Pérac, having to go his rounds, could not linger till her awakening. He came in at nightfall. His air was triumphant. "Our affair is working well," said he. "Monsieur Bernier will come here tomorrow, and you may rest easy. He is an Englishman, a sailor. You don't know any such person, do you?" "No, not at all," replied Caroline. "You saw him again, then?" "No, he had just gone out, but I saw Dame Roquebert, who is better and begins to have her senses. She told me the little one cried last night, and before he fell asleep asked over and again for his Charlotte. The father inquired who she was. It seems that Roquebert had no great wish to speak of you, but his wife, who is a good Christian, and the little girl, who is fond of you too, said you were an angel from heaven, and the gentleman replied he would like to thank you, and make you some recompense. He asked where you lived. He has never been at our house, but remembered me perfectly. He said he would come and see us soon. He promised the child this, and even that he would bring you back, in order to make him go to sleep." "In all this," said Caroline, "I see only one thing, and that is, this stranger is coming to offer me money." "Well, let him do it, so much the better. It will be an opportunity to show him you are not what he thinks. You will see one another, you will converse. He will find you are an educated young lady, above what he supposes you are, and I will tell him your history, because this history of yours does you credit." "No," replied Caroline quickly. "What? Shall I entrust my secret to a stranger, after so many precautions to conceal my name and position?" "But since you do not know him," said Justine, "if you are agreed on the matter of the child, he should be entrusted with the whole. Having his secret, we can afford to give him ours. He would have no inducement to betray it." "Justine," cried Mademoiselle de Saint-Genès, who was near a window that faced the street, "listen! Heaven! Not another word. There he is, certainly, this Monsieur Bernier. He is coming here, and it is, yes, I was sure, it is he. It is Monsieur de Villemer. Oh, my friends, hide me. Tell him I am gone, that I am not coming back. If he sees me, if he speaks to me, can't you feel that I am lost?" End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of the Marquis de Villemer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Marquis de Villemer by George Sand, translated by Ralph Keeler. Chapter 24. Justine followed Caroline, who had escaped, to her own room, and made signs to Pérac that he should receive the Marquis and be self-possessed. Peleg was equal to the emergency. He received Monsieur de Villemer with the calm dignity of a man who has the most rigid ideas of duty. It was no longer a question of putting him in communication with the pretended Charlotte. It was necessary to get him away before any suspicion arose in his mind, or, in case they had already arisen, to dispel them at once. From the first words of the Marquis, Peleg saw that he suspected nothing. Desirous to set out again in a few days with his son, whom he intended to keep nearer to himself in future, he had made the most of a fine morning to come on foot and repay this debt of gratitude to some generous stranger. He had not supposed the distance so great, and was, therefore, a little late in arriving. He confessed he was somewhat tired, and, in point of fact, his face betrayed both weariness and suffering. Peleg hastened to offer him food and drink, the duties of hospitality preceding everything. He called Justine, who had by this time regained her composure, and they waited upon Monsieur de Villemer, who, catching at this opportunity of rewarding his entertainers generously, accepted their services with a good grace. He learned with regret that Charlotte had gone away, but there was no reason why he should ask many questions about her. He thought of leaving a present for her, which Justine, in a low tone, advised her husband to accept, that he might not be surprised in anything. Caroline would readily find a chance to send it back. Peleg did not see the necessity. His pride revolted at the idea of seeming to accept money on her account. Caroline, in her little chamber, overheard this strife on a point of delicacy. The voice of the Marquis sent shudders through her. She dared not stir. It seemed as if Monsieur de Villemer would recognize her footfall through the flooring. He, for his part, hoping to find a way of discharging his obligations under some different form, pretended and really tried to eat a little, and after this inquired whether he could hire a horse to return with. The night was dark, and the rain came on again. Peleg agreed to carry him back, and went out to get his wagon ready. But first he climbed up softly to Caroline's room. "This poor gentleman makes me uneasy," he said in a low voice. "He is very ill, that I am sure of. You can see drops of sweat on his forehead, and yet he creeps up to the fire like a man with a fever chill. He could not swallow 2 morsels, and when he breathes hard, it seems to affect his heart like a spasm, for he puts his hand there, smiling bravely all the while, but afterwards carrying it to his head, as one does in severe pain." "Heavens!" exclaimed Caroline in alarm. "When he is ill, it is so dangerous. You must not carry him back tonight. Your wagon is not easy, and then the bad roads and the cold and this rain and his fever. No, no, he must stay here tonight. But where, pray? He would rather sleep out of doors than at the inn, which is so untidy. There is only one way. Keep him from going. Keep him here. Give him my room. I will gather up my things. It will not take long, and I will go to your daughter-in-law's. With my son's wife, or in the village, you will be too near. If it should happen to be a little worse in the night, you would come in spite of yourself and take care of him." "That is true. What shall I do?" "Do you want me to say? Well, you have courage and health. I will take you to Luçon, where you can pass the night with my sister-in-law. It is as neat there as it is here, and tomorrow, after he goes, I will come for you." Yes, you are right," said Caroline, doing up her bundle hastily. "Make him agree to stay, and tell your son, as you go by, to harness Mignon." "No, not Mignon. He has been traveling all day. We must take the mule." Peleg, having given his orders, returned to tell the Marquis the rain had set in for the whole evening, which was indeed true, and giving Justine a significant glance, he urged him to stay so cordially that Monsieur de Villemer consented. "You are right, my friends," he said, with his heartbroken smile. "I am somewhat ill, and I am one of those who have no right to wish for death." "No one has that right," replied Peleg, "but you will not be dangerously sick here with us, I assure you. My wife will take good care of you. The chamber up above is very clean and warm, and if you get worse, you have only to knock lightly, just once. We shall hear it." Justine went upstairs to prepare his room and embrace poor Caroline, who was really dismayed. "What?" said Caroline, speaking very low. "I know he is sick, and I am going to desert him in this way. No, I was mad. I will stay." "But that is just what Pélec will never let you do," replied Justine. "Pélec is stern, but what would you? Perhaps he is right. If you take pity on one another now, you will never be able to part again, and then, for myself, I am sure you would never do anything wrong, but the mother... And then think what other people might say." Caroline would not listen. Pélec went upstairs, took her hand with an air of authority, and made her come down. She had put her poor heart under the guidance of this Protestant of the Cevennes. There was no longer any way of drawing back. He led her out to the carriage and put in her bundle. At this moment, Caroline, who had really lost her senses, escaped from his grasp, darted into the house through the kitchen door, and caught sight of Monsieur de Villemer, who was seated with his back toward her. She went no farther. Her reason returned. And then his appearance reassured her a little. He had not that bruised, broken-down aspect she had seen him wear on the night of his former attack. He was sitting before the fire, reading in Pélec's Bible. The little iron lamp hanging from the mantelpiece threw its light on his black hair, wavy like his son's, and partly also on his clear, strong forehead. Monsieur de Villemer was doubtless suffering much, but he still wished to live. He had not lost hope. "Here I am," said Caroline, returning to Pélec. "He didn't see me, and I have seen him. I am more at ease. Let us start. But you must promise on your honor," added she, as she drew near the step of the carriage, "that if he is taken tonight with suffocation, you will come for me, at whatever damage to your horse. It must be done, do you see? No one else knows what this sick man needs in way of care, and you would see him die in your own house, and you would have it on your conscience forever." Pélec promised, and they set out. The weather was dreadful, and the road frightful, but Pélec knew every one of its holes and its stones. Besides, the distance was short. He left Caroline at the house of his sister-in-law, and had reached home again by 11 o'clock. The Marquis was feeling better. He had gone to lie down after having chatted with Justine in such a friendly way that she was delighted. "Do you see, Pélec, this man," she said. "He has a good heart, like hers. I can understand it perfectly myself." "Stop talking now," said Pélec, who knew the thinness of the flooring. "If he is asleep, we ought to sleep too." At L'Entriac the night passed in absolute quiet. The Marquis actually rested, and at 2 o'clock awoke, having shaken off the fever. He felt imbued with a pleasant calm, such as he had not known for a long time, and he attributed this to some sweet dream that he had forgotten, though its impression remained. Unwilling to awaken his host, he kept still, gazing at the four walls of the little chamber, brightly lighted by his lamp, and grasping the facts of his position more positively than he had done before since Caroline's departure. He had debated 1,000 extreme measures. Then he had said to himself that his first duty was to his son, and the sight of this child had given him the force of will he needed to resist the physical disease which now began to threaten him anew. Within 24 hours he had fixed upon a definite plan. He would take Didier to Madame Aubert, leaving with her a letter for Caroline, and then quit France for some time, so that Mademoiselle de Saint-Genès, reassured by his absence, might return to be near her sister in Eaton. In the course of a few quiet weeks, the Marchioness would perhaps get further information, or perhaps her secret would be discovered by the Duke, who had sworn he would draw it from her by surprise. If the Duke failed, Urbain was not at the end of his resources. He would come back quietly to the castle of Montroche, where his mother was to pass the summer with her daughter-in-law, and he would not let Caroline know of his return until he had cleared her in his mother's estimation and thus again smoothed away every difficulty. The most important and the most urgent thing, then, was to draw Mademoiselle Saint-Genès from her mysterious hiding-place. The Marquis still thought she was in some Parisian convent. He found himself compelled to stay a few days longer in Polniac to make sure of Dame Roquebert's complete recovery before grieving her by taking away his son, and this delay had fretted him more than anything else. To cheat his impatience, he asked himself why he should not write to Madame Aubert at once, and to Caroline also, that they might be prepared to rejoin each other after his departure for a foreign land. By this means he would perhaps gain a few days. He could mail the letter at once, as he would pass through Le Puy on his return to Polniac. What gave him the idea of writing from L'Entriac was mainly the sight of the little bureau, where Caroline had left pens, some ink and a cup, and a few stray sheets of paper. These objects, on which his gaze fastened mechanically, seemed inviting him to follow his inspiration. He rose noiselessly, put the lamp on the table, and wrote to Caroline. My friend, my sister, you will not desert an unhappy man who, for a year past, has centered in you the hopes of his life. Caroline, do not mistake my meaning. I have a favor to ask of you which you cannot refuse. I am going away. I have a son who has no mother. I love him devotedly. I entrust him to you. Come back. As for myself, I go to England. You shall never see me again, if you have lost faith in me. But that is impossible. When have I been unworthy of your esteem, Caroline? The Marquis stopped abruptly. An object of little importance had caught his eye. The ordinary paper, the steel pens, had no peculiarities, but one black bead lay on the table between his hand and the inkstand, a trifle insignificant in itself, but one bringing with it a whole world of memories. It was a bit of jet, cut and perforated in a certain unusual fashion. It was part of a valueless bracelet Caroline had worn at Saval, which he easily recognized because she used to take it off whenever she wrote, and he had himself formed a habit of toying with this bracelet while talking to her. He had handled it 100 times, and one day she had said to him, "Pray, don't break it. It is all I have left from my mother's jewel box." He had looked at it respectfully and held it lovingly in his hands. Just as she was on the point of quitting her little room in L'Entraillac, Caroline, in her precipitation, had broken the bracelet. She had picked up the beads hastily, leaving behind this one. This black bead reversed all the ideas of the Marquis. But what kind of dreaming was this? These cut jets might be an industrial product of the country he was then in. Nevertheless, he sat motionless, absorbed in new surmises. He breathed and questioned the vague perfume of the room. He looked everywhere without moving from his chair. There was nothing on the walls, nothing on the table, nothing on the mantel. Finally, he became aware of some bits of paper in the fireplace which were not completely charred. He bent over the ashes, searched minutely, and found one single fragment of an address, only 2 syllables which were legible. One, written by hand, was the last in the word L'Entraillac, the other, am, forming part of the postmark. The postmark was that of Eaton, the handwriting that of Madame Hautebert. There could be no longer a doubt. Charlotte was no one but Caroline, and perhaps she had never gone away. Perhaps she was still in the house. From that moment the Marquis had the cunning, the watchfulness, the coolness, and the keen perception of a savage. He discovered the pipe from the little spring leading down to the sink below. The pipe itself was stopped up, but there was more than one fissure in the plaster which surrounded it. He put his ear down to it closely and caught Pélec's long, even breathing as he lay yet asleep. Not a word, though spoken ever so low, could then escape him. In a few moments he distinctly heard Justine rise, uttering the words, "Come, get up, Pélec. Perhaps poor Caroline has not been sleeping as well as we have." "A night is a night," said Pélec. "Besides, I can't go for her till after he has gone away." Justine listened and replied, "He doesn't stir, but he said he should get up at daybreak. Daylight isn't far off now. He means to go away without taking anything. He said so." "It is all the same," rejoined Pélec, who had now risen and whose voice was even more audible, though he spoke quite low. "I don't want him to set out on foot. It is too far. The lad shall saddle my horse, and when I have seen him fairly off, I will start for Lucon." Monsieur de Villemer had made sure. He stirred a little to show he was up, and went downstairs after having slipped his purse into the bureau drawer. He seemed very impatient to get back to Polniac, and declaring he felt perfectly strong, obstinately refused the horse. It would have been an encumbrance in the war of observation he was about to wage. He shook hands cordially with his entertainers and set out, but on the borders of the village, having inquired about the road of a passer-by, he changed his course, plunging into a byway that led to Lucon. He thought he could arrive there in advance of Pélec, wait for him stealthily, and see him take Caroline back. When he had made sure of her return to L'Entraillac, he would lay his plans further. Until then, being quite aware she was trying to escape him, He would not risk losing track of her again. But Peillac was very expeditious. Mignon traveled fast in spite of the roads, which grew worse and worse, forming one unbroken ascent in the direction of Luçon, and crossing more than one mountain declivity. The by-path cut off the angles of the main road but slightly, and the Marquis was distanced by the rustic equipage. He saw it pass and recognized Peillac, who, for his part, thought he distinguished in the morning fog a man who was not in peasant garb and who quickly retreated behind an embanking wall of rough stones. Peillac was suspicious. Very likely, he thought, he has been fooling us, or he has found out something. Well, if it is he, and if he is no more of an invalid than that, I will cure him of trying to follow a mountain horse on foot. He urged Mignon forward and arrived at Luçon with the first rays of the sun. Caroline, in deadly anxiety after a cruelly sleepless night, came out to meet him. "All is going well," said he. "I was mistaken yesterday. He is not so very ill, for he slept well and would return on foot." "So he is gone," replied Caroline, climbing to her seat by Peillac. "He never suspected anything, then, and I shall never see him again? Well, so much the better," and she burst into tears under her hood, which she pulled over her face in vain. Peillac heard her sob as if her heart would break. "So, you are the one going to be sick now," he said in a tone of paternal severity. "Come, be reasonable, or your Peillac will never believe you when you tell him you are a Christian." "So long as I do not weep before him, can you not excuse one moment of weakness in me? But what are you doing? Why are we going on toward Luçon?" Peillac thought he again caught sight of the Marquis still creeping onward. "You must excuse me," said he, "but I have an errand to do in the village. It is quite near." He entered the village, shrewdly thinking that the Marquis would still keep himself in sight at a distance. He went up the street and exchanged a few words with one of the townspeople. Pretext could not fail to be at hand. Then, returning to Caroline, he said, "You see, my daughter, you have too much on your mind. I want to revive your spirits. You know an excursion always does you good. Would you like to have me take you on one? Oh, a very pleasant one. If you have business anywhere, I don't want to incommode you. I will go wherever you'd like." "I shall have to go to the foot of Mézenc, to the village of Estable. It is a beautiful place, really, and you have been longing to see the grandest of the Cevennes." "You said it would be hard traveling over there until after next month." "Bless me! Why, the weather is cloudy, to be sure, and perhaps the roads are a little damaged. I haven't passed over them since last year, but they have been worked upon, as I have heard, and besides, you know with me there is no danger." "I assure you I am in no mood to worry about danger. Let us set out." Peillac hurried on his horse, which soon crossed the boundaries of Luçon and bravely descended the rocky hill, climbing the other slope again without delay, and even more rapidly. When they had reached the top, Peillac turned around, saw no one in the paths behind him, and looked at the road ahead, which was taking on a discouraging aspect. "You are going to see a wilderness," said he, "but that needn't annoy you, need it?" "No, no," replied she. "When we are desperate, we cease to be annoyed." Peillac went on, not without warning his companion repeatedly that the sun might not be disposed to shine, and that they had 4 leagues to go, and that perhaps Mézenc would be under a fog. All this had little interest for Caroline, who did not guess the hesitation of her old friend or his qualms of conscience. They traversed a mountain wooded with pines and cut into by a vast glade, the result of an ancient felling of the trees, which opened a gigantic avenue where the road, from a distance, looked like a highway for 100 chariots abreast. But when the little carriage had ventured in, it was a frightful task to get over the ground, rain-soaked and hollowed out into deep ruts in 1,000 places. Further on it was worse still. The turf was strewed with blocks of lava, which left boggy places between them, and when they found traces of a traveled road again, they had to turn aside for monstrous piles of flints and pebbles, to stop altogether before deep cuts or trenches to seek the old road among 20 others that lost themselves in the morass. The horse performed prodigies of courage and Peillac miracles of skill and judgment. At the expiration of 2 hours they had accomplished only 2 leagues, and were in open country on an interminable plateau at an elevation of 1,500 meters. Except the breaks here and there in the road, nothing could be distinguished. The sun had disappeared. A thick mist enshrouded everything, and nothing can paint the feeling of bitter desolation which fell upon Caroline. Pélec himself lost courage and kept silence. The obstructed road, which he had been forced to leave one side, did not reappear, and for the last 15 minutes they had been pacing over a spongy turf, broken up by the hoofs of cattle in search of pasturage, but no longer bearing any traces of wheels. The horse stopped, bathed in sweat. He thus gave warning that he had never been over this ground before. Pélec alighted, sinking almost knee-deep in the boggy soil, and tried to find where he was. It was out of the question. The mountains and ravines were only one plain of white vapor. "Have we lost our way?" asked Caroline with cool indifference. At this point the wind made a little opening in the fog, and they saw in the distance fantastic horizons empurpled by the sun, but the mist closed in again so quickly that Pélec could not determine his position from this isolated peak in the distant circle of mountains. However, they heard a confused barking and then voices, though they could not distinguish the dogs till they were quite upon them. These dogs were the advance guard of a caravan of men and mules, carrying vegetables and leather bottles. They were mountaineers who had been down to the plains to exchange the cheese and butter of their cows for the fruits and vegetables of the level country. They accosted Pélec, who asked information. They told him that he had done very wrong to think of going with a carriage to Estables at this season, that it could not be done, and that he would have to return. Pélec showed some obstinacy, and asked if he was still far from the village. They guided him into the road again, telling him he had work before him for an hour and a half. But as their animals were loaded and warm, and they themselves in haste to arrive, these mountaineers offered no assistance and disappeared, with a laugh at their little carriage. Caroline saw them rapidly vanish into the fog like shadows. It was absolutely necessary to let the horse breathe, for a fresh effort to regain the solid road had exhausted him. "What comforts me," said Pélec, really moved, "is that you don't complain of anything. It is very cold, nevertheless, and I'm sure the dampness has gone through your cloak." Caroline replied only by a shiver. A new shadow had just passed along the side of the road. It was Monsieur de Villemer. He pretended not to see the carriage, although he did see it perfectly, but he chose to seem unconscious that it held anyone he knew. He advanced with extraordinary energy, affecting an air of indifference. "It is he! I saw him," said Caroline to Pélec. "He goes wherever we go." "Well, let him go on, and we will turn back." "No, I cannot, I will not. He will die after such a walk. He will never reach Estables. Let us follow him." This time Caroline's terror was so commanding that Pélec obeyed. They came up with Monsieur de Villemer, who moved aside to let them pass, without stopping or looking up. He would be neither intrusive nor rebellious, but he would know, he would follow to the death. Unfortunately, he was at the end of his strength. The difficulty of this walk, which from Lontreuil had been a continual ascent, and for the last 2 leagues one chaos of stones and peaty turf, had started on him a profuse perspiration which he could feel freezing in the blast of a sharp wind that had suddenly veered to the east. He lost his breath and was forced to stop. Caroline turned her head toward him and was on the point of crying out. Pélec seized her arm. "Courage, my daughter," he said with his stern religious fervor. "The Lord requires it at your hands." And she felt herself overborne by the strong faith of the peasant. "What do you want to do for him?" resumed Pélec as he still drove on. "He has had strength to come so far. He will have enough to go the rest of the way. A man does not die from the effects of a walk. He will rest at Estables, and if he is sick, I shall be there." "But he is following me. You see, I shall have to speak to him there or elsewhere." "Why should he follow you? He does not suspect you are here even. So many travelers want to see Mézenc." "In such weather as this?" "The sun rose brightly, and we ourselves started to see Mézenc." The Marquis saw Caroline hesitate and submit. This was the final blow. No sooner had he seen himself left behind than he felt he could go no farther. He sank down on a stone, his eyes fixed on the black speck slowly vanishing from his sight, for the wind had risen suddenly and was violently scattering the fog, in whose stead there now came light flurries of snow and sleet. "So, she would have me know nothing more of her," said he to himself as he felt his strength failing. "She flees from hope. She has lost faith. Then she never loved me. And he lay down to die. End of chapter 24.
Chapter 25 of the Marquis de Villemer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michele Eaton. The Marquis de Villemer by George Sand. Translated by Ralph Keeler. Chapter 25. We must hasten, said Peyrac at the close of another half hour, as he saw the snow deepening. Here is something worse than fog. When this begins to fall, it soon piles up in the road higher than your head. The imprudent admission set Caroline in open rebellion. She wanted to jump from the carriage, fully determined to walk back to the place where she had met Monsieur de Villemer. Peyrac dissuaded her from this, but finally had to yield and return. In spite of the ever-increasing danger and the difficulties of a still slower progress over the half-league they had so painfully traversed, since losing sight of the Marquis, it was in vain for them to search by simply looking for him. In 1 hour the snow in large spreading flakes had buried up the ground and its ruggedness. It was impossible for them to tell whether they had not passed by the place they wanted to explore. Caroline uttered groans, inaudible to herself, finding no words at her command but the faint outcry, "My God, my God!" Peyrac no longer strove to quiet her, and only encouraged her by telling her to look carefully. Suddenly the horse stopped. "It must be we have found the road again here," said Peyrac. "Mignon remembers." "Then we have come too far," replied Caroline. "But we have met no one," returned Peyrac. "This gentleman, seeing the storm coming on, has gone back to Lausanne, and we, who are nearer Estables, are running a great risk in staying here, unless it stops snowing. I give you warning." Go on, Peyrac," cried Caroline, leaping into the snow. "For my part, I shall stay here till I find him." Peyrac made no reply. He alighted and began searching, but without the least hope. There was already 1/2 foot of snow, and the wind, drifting it into every hollow, would soon bury up the corpse. Caroline walked on at random, gliding forward like a spirit, so great was her excitement. She was already at some little distance from the carriage, when she heard the horse snort loudly as he put down his head. She thought he was dying, and watching him with real distress, saw him scenting out something in front of him in a strange way. It was a revelation. She darted forward and perceived a gloved hand, apparently belonging to one dead, which the breath of the horse, melting the snow over it, had brought to light. The body extended beneath was the obstacle which the animal had refused to tread underfoot. Peyrac came running at Caroline's call, and extricating Monsieur de Villemer, put him in the carriage, where Mademoiselle de Saint-Genès held him up and tried to warm him in her arms. Peyrac took the bridle and walked on again in the direction of Mazenc. He knew perfectly there was not a moment to lose, but went on without knowing where to set foot, and he soon disappeared in a ravine which he was unable to clear. The horse stopped of his own accord. Peyrac got up again, but on trying to make him back, found the wheels caught in some unseen obstacle. Besides, the horse was at the end of his strength. Peyrac treated him harshly, but all to no purpose. He struck his pony for the first time in his life. He pulled on the bridle till the creature's mouth bled. The poor animal turned upon him with a glance of almost human intelligence, as if to say, "I have done all I could. I can do nothing more to save you." "Must we then perish here?" said Peyrac, disheartened, as he watched the snow falling in inexorable whirls. The plateau had become a Siberian waste, beyond which Mazenc alone showed his livid head between the gusts of wind. Not a tree, not a roof, not a rock for shelter. Peyrac knew there was nothing to be done. "Let us hope," said he, which in these southern forms of speech simply means "let us wait." It soon occurred to him, however, that he would gain the next 15 minutes, even if they should be the last of life. He took a small board from his little carriage and fought with the drifting snow, which threatened to bury up both horse and vehicle. Incessantly for 10 minutes he worked like a wrestler at this task of clearing away, saying to himself that perhaps it was all useless, but that he would defend himself and Caroline to the last breath. At the expiration of the 10 minutes he thanked God the snow grew lighter, the wind abated, the fog, which was far less dangerous, strove to reappear. He slackened his work without giving it over. At last he saw something like a pale streak of light breaking through the depths of the sky. It was a promise of fair weather. So far he had not spoken a word or uttered an oath. If Caroline had been fated to perish there, she would not have suspected it till the last moment. Yet he looked at her and found her so pale, and her glance so wild, that he was alarmed. "Well, well," said he, "what is the trouble? There is no more danger. This will be nothing." "Oh, nothing, is it?" she replied with a bitter smile, pointing to Urbane. Stretched out on the seat of the little vehicle, his face livid with the cold, his large eyes wide open and glazed, like those of a corpse. Peyrac looked around him again. It was hopeless to expect human aid. He sprang into the carriage, seized Monsieur de Villemer firmly in his arms, rubbed him vigorously, bruised him in his iron hands, trying to impart to him the warmth of his own blood, reanimated by exercise and a strong will. But it was all in vain. With the effects of the cold were united those of a nervous crisis peculiar to the organisation of the Marquis. "He is not dead, though," said Peyrac. "I feel that. I am sure of it. If I only had something to make a fire with, but I can't make one of stones." "We might burn the carriage at all events," cried Caroline. "That is an idea, yes, but after that?" "After that, perhaps the Lord will send help. Don't you see, the first thing is to prevent death from laying hold of us here." Peyrac saw Caroline so pale, and the blue lines so defined under her eyes, that he began to think she felt herself dying also. He hesitated no longer, but risked all to save all. He unharnessed the pony, which, like the horses of the Cossacks, at once rolled in the snow to rest himself. Taking the awning from his carriage and placing it on the ground, Peyrac carried Monsieur de Villemer, still frozen and motionless, to it. Then, drawing from his boxes a few handfuls of hay, some old papers, and fragments of matting, he put the whole under the vehicle and struck fire with the flint and steel with which he was accustomed to light his pipe. Breaking up with his farrier's tools the boards and planks of his poor little carriage, he succeeded in a few moments in kindling them into a blaze and into brands. He demolished and broke in pieces as fast as the fire burned. The snow no longer fell, and Monsieur de Villemer, lying within a semicircle of blazing wreck, began to gaze in a stupor at the strange scene, which he took for a dream. "He is saved, saved, do you hear, Peyrac?" cried Caroline, who saw the Marquis making an attempt to rise. "100 blessings on your head. You have saved him." The Marquis heard Caroline's voice close by him, but still thinking it some hallucination, made no effort to look at her. He did not comprehend what was taking place till he felt on his hands the distracted pressure of Caroline's lips. Then he thought he must be dying, as she no longer avoided him, and trying to smile, he bade her adieu in a faint voice. "No, no, not adieu," she replied, covering his forehead with kisses. "You must live. I will have it so. I love you." A slight flush came over the livid face, but no words could express his joy. The Marquis still feared it might be all a dream. Yet he was plainly reviving. The warmth had concentrated under the carriage top, which served him as a shelter. He was as comfortable as he could possibly be made there, lying on the cloaks of Caroline and Payrac. But we must go on nevertheless, thought the latter, and his unquiet eyes questioned the brightening horizon. The cold was severe, the fire was going out for want of fuel, and the invalid surely could not walk to Establish. And was Caroline herself equal to such an attempt? To mount them both on the horse was the only expedient, but would the exhausted animal have strength to carry them? No matter, it would have to be tried, and first of all they must give the horse some oats. Payrac looked but found none. The fire had consumed the little bag, as well as the box in which it was stored. An exclamation from Caroline revived his hopes. She showed him a light vapour on the rising ground which sheltered them. He ran in that direction, and saw below him an ox cart, painfully approaching, the driver smoking in order to keep warm. "You see now," said Caroline, when the cart had nearly reached them, "the Lord has helped us." Monsieur de Villemer was still so weak that he had to be lifted into the cart, which fortunately was loaded with straw, and in this Payrac buried him up after a fashion. Caroline placed herself near him. Payrac bestrode his pony, leaving the wreck of his poor carriage behind, and in an hour they had finally reached the village of Establish. Payrac went disdainfully by the inn of a certain giantess with bare legs and a golden necklace, a veritable tardigrade of peculiar repulsiveness. He knew the Marquis would find no zealous attention there. He conducted him to the house of a peasant whom he knew. The people crowded around the invalid, overwhelming him with questions and friendly proffers which he did not understand. Payrac, with an air of authority, dismissed all who could be of no service, gave his orders, and went to work himself. In a few minutes the fire was blazing, and hot wine was foaming in the kettle. Monsieur de Villemer, stretched on a thick bed of straw and dry turf, saw Caroline on her knees beside him, busily engaged in protecting his clothes from the fire, and caring for him with a mother's tenderness. She was uneasy about the terrible drink which Payrac was brewing for him with strong spices, but the Marquis had confidence in the experience of the mountaineer. He made a sign that he would obey him, and Caroline, with trembling hand, put the cup to his lips. He was soon able to speak, thank his new host, and tell Payrac, pressing his hand warmly, that he would like to be alone with him and Caroline. It was no easy thing to induce the family to forsake their own roof for several hours. Places of shelter are rare under this inclement sky, and the flocks, the sole dependence of the Sevenois, are lodged in a way to leave no room for the inhabitants. Those living here in particular have a reputation for rudeness and lack of hospitality, which dates from the murder of the mathematician sent by Cassini to measure the height of Mazenc, and who was taken for a sorcerer. They have greatly improved, and now show themselves more civil, but their habits of life are those of the lowest poverty, and yet they are given to trading, raise magnificent cattle, and are as well provided as possible with commodities for barter. Still, the severity of the climate and the isolation of their rough dwelling place has passed into their dispositions as well as into their blood. The room which, with the stable, comprised the whole interior of the house, was given up at last to Payrac and his friends. It was quite small and hardly richer than the Celtic grotto of the old woman at Espelay. The smoke poured out partly through the chimney, and partly also through a gaping hole in the wall on one side. 2 beds, shaped like boxes, gave lodgings at night, in some incomprehensible way, to a family of 6 persons. The bare rock formed the floor, and on one side the cows, goats, sheep, and hens took their comfort. Payrac spread clean straw around everywhere, brought in a supply of wood, rummaged in the cupboard, found some bread, and urged Caroline to eat and rest. The Marquis, with a look, begged her to think of herself, for she dared not leave him a minute, and still held his hands in hers. He wanted to speak. He was able to speak now, and yet he was afraid to say a word. He feared she would go away from him as soon as she saw he knew himself beloved, and then Peyrac puzzled him cruelly. He did not comprehend in the least the part played by this rustic providence, which, in its watch over Caroline, had shown itself so obstinate and so merciless toward him, but which was now beginning to regard him with unbounded solicitude and devotion. At last Peyrac went out. He could not forget his poor horse, his faithful companion, which he blamed himself for having treated so brutally, and which, on his arrival, he had been forced to entrust to the care of strangers. "Caroline," said the Marquis, having seated himself on a stool, and still leaning on her arm, "I had many things to tell you, but I have not my reason. No, really, I haven't the use of it, and I'm afraid to talk in my delirium. Forgive me. I am so happy to see you, to feel you near me, now I have come back again from the verge of death. But I cannot trouble you any more. Heavens, what a burden I have been on your life. It shall be so no longer. This is only an accident, a foolish, imprudent act on my part. But how could I consent to lose you again? You do not know, you will never know. No, you have no idea. You don't comprehend what you are to me, and perhaps you don't care ever to comprehend it. Tomorrow, perhaps, you will shun me again. And why, pray? Here, read," he added, searching for and then handing her the crumpled page of the letter begun at Lantriac that very morning. "It may be illegible now, the rain and the snow." "No," said Caroline, leaning toward the fire. "I can see. I read perfectly, and I understand. I knew before. I guessed and I accept. It was the wish of my heart, the dream of my life. My heart and my life, do they not both belong to you? Alas, no, not yet, but if you would believe in me." "Don't tire yourself by talking, trying to convince me," said Caroline, with something imperious in her warmth. "I believe in you, but not in my own destiny. Well, I accept it, such as you make it for me. Good or ill, it shall be dear to me, since I can accept no other. Now listen to me. Perhaps I have only an instant to tell you this in. I don't know what events your conscience and mine will have to meet. I know your mother to be inexorable. I have felt the chill of her contempt, and we have nothing to hope from God if we break her heart. We must submit then, and that for ever. You yourself have said that to form any scheme of being happy upon the loss of a mother is placing the dream of happiness among the most criminal of thoughts, and such happiness would be under the ban of 100 curses. We ourselves should curse it in our hearts." "Why do you remind me of all this?" asked the Marquis sorrowfully. "Do you think I have forgotten? But you believe a change in my mother to be impossible, and I see from this that you would not have me try to bring it about, and that pity alone—" "You see nothing at all," cried Caroline, putting her hand on his mouth. "You see nothing, if you don't see that I love you." "Oh, heaven!" said the Marquis, sinking to her feet. "Say that again, it seems like a dream. This is the first time you have said it. I have thought I divined it, but I dare not believe it now. Tell me so again, tell me, and then let me die." "Yes, I love you more than my own life," she replied, pressing to her heart the noble brow. "Seat of a soul so brave and true, I love you more than my pride of womanhood. I have denied it to myself this long time. I have denied it in my prayers to God, and I lied to God and to myself. At last I understood, and I fled through a cowardly weakness. I felt all was lost, and so it is. Well, what matters it after all? It only involves myself. While I cherish the hope of learning to forget, I could struggle, But you love me too well, I see that now, and you will die if I forsake you. I thought you were dead a few hours ago, and then I saw clearly into our lives. I had killed you. I might have saved you, you the noblest and best of beings, but I made you the victim of my vain self-respect. And what am I to let you die so, when all that is not your regard is nothing to me? No, no, I have resisted long enough. I have been proud enough, cruel enough, and you have suffered too much from my wrongdoing. I love you, do you hear? I will not become your wife, because that would be to plunge you into bitter remorse, into a woe beyond remedy. But I will be your friend, your servant, a mother to your child, your faithful companion. The purity of our lives may be misunderstood. I shall be mistaken for Didier's actual mother, perhaps. Well, I consent even to that. I accept the scorn I have dreaded, and it seems to me drinking of this cup, poured out by you, will give me a new life. O noble heart as pure as heaven, cried the Marquis, I accept for my part this divine sacrifice. Pray do not scorn me for that. You make me feel worthy of it, and I will soon put an end to it. Yes, yes, I shall work miracles. I feel strong enough now. My mother will yield without a regret. In my heart I feel now the faith and the power that shall persuade her to it. But even if the whole world should rise up to condemn you, do you see, you, my sister and my daughter, my pure-minded companion, my dearest friend, you will only stand the higher in my regard. I shall only be more and more proud of you. What is the world, what is public opinion, to a man who has penetrated the social life of past ages, and that of the present as well, fathoming the mysteries of their selfishness and the nothingness of their deceit? Such a man knows full well that at all times, by the side of one poor truth which floats safely, 1,000 truths go under with the mark of infamy upon them. He well knows that the best and most unselfish spirits have walked in the footprints of their Lord, on a thorny path, where wounds and insults fall like rain. Well, we will walk there if need be. Love will keep us from feeling these base attacks. Yes, I can answer for that, at least, and this is what I can swear in defiance of all threats from that destiny the world would make for us. You shall be loved, and you shall be happy. You knew me well, cruel one, shutting your eyes as you ran away. You knew perfectly that my whole life, my whole soul is love and nothing else. You knew perfectly that if I have sometimes been eager in pursuit of truth, it was from love of her alone, and not for the vain glory of proclaiming her in person. I am not myself a scholar. I am not an author. I am an unknown soldier, who of my own free will avoid the noise and smoke of the conflict, fighting unsupported and in the background, not through lack of courage, but that my mother and brother may not be wounded in the struggle. I have accepted this obscure position without a pang to my vanity. I felt that my heart stood in need, not of praise, but of love. All the ambition of my fellows, all their immoderate vanities, their thirst for power, their needs of luxury, their continual hunger for notoriety, what did all these matter to me? I could not be amused with toys like these. I was myself only a poor single-hearted man, enamoured of an ideal, an ingenuous child, if you will, seeking love and feeling it alive within him long before meeting her who was to develop its power. I kept silence, knowing I should have to bear raillery, a thing indifferent as far as I am concerned personally, but one which would have pained me as an outrage to my inmost sacred religion. Once, only once in my life, I should like to tell you this, Caroline. I have loved— Don't tell me, cried she. I don't want to know. Nevertheless, you ought to know all. She was good and gentle, and in recalling her, I can without an effort respect and bless her in her tomb. But she could not love me. It was the fault of her destiny and not her own. There is not a reproach in my heart for her. There are many for myself. I have hated myself bitterly and done heavy penance for having yielded to a passion which was never encouraged or really shared. I was only reconciled to life when I saw life blooming into its fairest and purest form in you. I then understood why I was born in tears, why I had been fated to love, and condemned to love too early, with sorrow and in sin, because I sought the one dream and aim of my life too eagerly. And now I feel restored for ever and saved. I feel that my character will regain its balance, my youth its hopes, my heart its natural sustenance. Have faith in me, you whom heaven has sent me. You know for a certainty that we are made for each other. You have felt 1,000 times, in spite of yourself, that we had but one mind and one thought, that we loved the same principles, the same art, the same names, the same people, and the same things without influencing each other, except to strengthen and develop what was already there, to make the germs of our deepest feelings bud and blossom. Do you remember, Caroline? Do you remember Serval, and our sunny hours in the valley, and the hours of delicious coolness beneath the arches of the library, where with lovely vases of flowers you paid festive honours to this deep mysterious union of our souls? Was it not an indissoluble marriage which our hands consecrated every morning in their pure touch of greeting? Did not our first glance every single day give us to each other, and that for all time? And can all this be lost utterly, flown forever? Did you yourself believe for one instant that this man could live without you, deprived of air and sunlight, that he would consent to fall back into the darkness again? No, no, you never believed it. He would have followed you to the end of the earth. He would have gone through fire and water and ice to rejoin you. And if you had left me to die in the snow today, can't you feel that my spirit set free would have still, like a desperate spectre, pursued you through the mountain storm? Listen to him, just listen, said Caroline to Payrac, who had come in and was stupidly looking at the Marquis, now seemingly transfigured by passion. Hear what he says, and do not wonder if I love him better than myself. Do not be frightened, do not worry, do not go away pitying us. Stay with us and see how happy we are. The presence of a good old man like you will not trouble us. Perhaps you will not understand us, you who would listen to nothing beyond a certain duty, which I understood yesterday, but no longer admit today. Yet against your will even, you will love me again and give me your blessing, for you will feel the rightful authority of this man, who is more to me than all other men, and to whom God has given only the words of truth. Yes, I love him. I love you, you whom I came near losing today, and I will never leave you again. I will follow you everywhere. Your child shall be mine, as your country is my country, your faith my faith. There is no higher honour in this world, there is no other virtue before God, than loving you, serving you, and comforting you. Monsieur de Villemer stood there, radiant with a pure joy, which dazzled Caroline, but did not frighten her. In this hour of enthusiasm, there was not even the memory of a trouble. He pressed her to his heart with that sacred paternal feeling which belonged to his nature, and which arose from an instinctive idea of protection, the rightful authority of a high intelligence over a noble heart, of a superior mind over another mind raised by its love to the same level. They did not ask themselves whether this lofty rapture would endure always. It must be said to their praise that they felt the infinite tenderness of friendship, enthusiastic, it is true, but deep and sincere, rather than any other intoxication, and that the aim of their future was, at this moment, defined and summed up in their minds in this one resolution, never to forsake each other. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of the Marquis de Villemer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michele, Eaton. The Marquis de Villemer by George Sand. Translated by Ralph Keeler. Chapter 26. At about 4 o'clock, while the brightening skies permitted Peyrac to make preparations for their return, by hiring another cart well provided with straw and blankets, together with oxen and a skilful teamster, so as to reach Lausanne before evening, the young and beautiful Duchess de Leria, robed in moire, her arms loaded with cameos, came into the apartment of her mother-in-law at the castle of Mavaroche in Limousin, leaving her husband and Madame d'Arglade chatting with apparent friendliness in a magnificent drawing-room. Diana had an air of joyful triumph, which struck the Marchioness. "Well, what is it, my beauty?" asked the old lady. "What has happened? Has my other son returned?" "He will come soon," replied the Duchess. "You have the promise of it, and you know we feel no uneasiness on his account. His brother knows where he is, and declares we shall see him again by the end of the week. So you find me excessively gay, excessively happy. Even this little Madame d'Arglade is delightful. Dear mamma, she is the source of all my happiness." "Oh, you are jesting, little masquerader. You can't endure her. Why have you brought her here?" "I did not request it. No one can amuse me but you." "And I undertake it more bravely than ever," replied Diana, with a bewitching smile. "And this very d'Arglade, whom I adore, is going to furnish me with weapons against your wretched melancholy. Listen, dear good mamma. At last we have got her awful secret, though not without trouble by any means. For 3 days we have been manoeuvring round her, the Duke and I, overpowering her with our mutual trust, our surrender of ourselves to happiness, our most graceful tenderness. At last the estimable woman, who is not our dupe, and whom our aggravating mockeries drove to extremity, has given me to understand that Caroline had for an accomplice in her great fault. Oh, you know whom. She has told you. I pretended not to understand. It was a little thrust right into my heart. No, a deep thrust. I must tell the truth. But I hastened to find my dear Duke, and flung it squarely in his face. Is it true, you dreadful man, that you have been in love with Mademoiselle de Saint-Genot? The Duke sprang like a cat. No. Like a leopard whose paw had been trodden on. There, I was sure of it, said he, roaring. It is our good Leonie who has invented that. And then he began to talk of killing her. So I had to quiet him and tell him I didn't believe it, which wasn't quite true. I did believe it a little bit. And this son of yours, who isn't dull, he perceived that, and he flung himself at my feet, and he swore. Oh, but he did swear by all that I believe and love, by the true God, and then by you, that it was just an infamous lie. And now I am as sure of this, as I am that I came into the world for nothing else, but just to love his Grace the Duke. The Duchess had a childish lisp, as natural as Madame d'Arglade's was affected, and she united with this a tone of resolute sincerity that made her perfectly charming. The Marchioness had no time to wonder over what she heard, for the Duke came in as triumphant as his wife. "There," cried he, "God be praised, you will never see that viper again. She has called for her carriage. She is going off furious, but with no poison in her fangs. I can answer for that, mother, my poor mother, how you have been deceived. I can appreciate your suffering, and you wouldn't say a word, not even to me, who could in a breath. But I have confessed her, this odious woman, who would have brought despair into my household. If Diana were not an angel from heaven, against whom the powers of darkness will never prevail. Well, mother, be a little vexed with us all. It will do you good. Madame d'Arglade saw, did she not, with her own 2 eyes, saw Mademoiselle de Saint-Genot leaning on my arm and crossing the lawn of Serval at daybreak. She saw me speak to her affectionately and shake hands with her. Well, she didn't see the whole, for I kissed her hands one after the other. And what she did not overhear I'm going to tell you, for I remember as well as if it happened yesterday. I was excited enough for that, I said to her. My brother has been at the point of death tonight, and you have saved him. Pity him, still keep him under your care, help me to hide his illness from our mother, and thanks to you he will not die. That is what I said. I swear it before heaven, and this is what had taken place. The Duke recounted the whole, and going into the matter more thoroughly still, even confessed his false notions about Caroline, and his fruitless manoeuvring, which she had not even perceived. He described the outburst of jealousy against him on the part of the Marquis, their disagreement for 1 hour, their passionate reconciliation, the confession of the one, the solemn oaths of the other, the discovery he made at that moment of his brother's alarming condition, his own imprudence in leaving him, thinking him asleep and comfortable, the broken window pane, the cries Caroline overheard, and Caroline herself rushing to his aid, reviving the sick man, staying beside him, devoting herself from that time onward to caring for him, amusing him, and aiding him in his work. And all this, added the Duke, with a devotedness, a frankness, a forgetfulness of self, unequalled in all my experience. This Caroline, you see, is a woman of rare worth, and I have sought in vain for a person who would suit my brother better in point of age, character, modesty, or congenial tastes. I do not find one anywhere. You know I have desired to have him make a more brilliant match. Well, now that he is safe from serious embarrassment, thanks to this angel here, who has restored us all to freedom and dignity, now that I have seen the persistence and strength of my brother's love for a person who is, more than all the others, the sincere friend he needs, and lastly, now that Diana understands all this better than I, and exhorts me to believe in love matches, I have, dear mother, only one thing to say, which is, that we must find Caroline again, and you must cheerfully give her your blessing as the best friend you ever had, except my wife, and the best daughter you can wish beside her. Oh, my children, cried the Marchioness, you make me so happy. I have hardly lived since this calumny. Urbain's grief, the absence of this child who was dear to me, the fear of setting at variance 2 brothers so perfectly united, if I acknowledge what I suppose to be true, what I am so glad find false, we must hasten after the Marquis, after Caroline. But where, for heaven's sake? You know where your brother is, but does he know where she is? No, he set out without knowing, replied the Duchess, but Madame Hodebert knows. Write her, dear mother, tell her the truth, and she will tell Caroline. Yes, I am going to write, said the Marchioness, but how can I let poor Urbain know at once? I will take charge of that, said the Duke. I would go myself if the Duchess could go with me, but to leave her for 3 days, on my word it is too soon. Fie, cried the Duchess, as soon as the honeymoon is over, do you mean to be running off without me in that way, light-hearted and light-footed too? Ah, how mistaken you are, you charming man. I shall keep you in order with all your inconstancy. And pray how will you do it then? asked the Duke, looking at her fondly. By loving you always more and more. We shall see whether you grow weary of it. While the Duke was caressing the golden hair of his wife, the Marchioness was writing to Camille with a youthful sprightliness which was certainly remarkable. Here, my children, said she, is this right? The Duchess read, My dear Madame Hodebert, bring Caroline back to us and let me embrace you both. She has been the victim of a horrible slander. I know all. I weep for having believed in the fall of an angel. May she forgive me. Let her come back. Let her be my daughter always and never leave me again. There are two of us who cannot live without her. That is delightful. It is kind and just like you, said the Duchess, sealing up the note, and the Duke rang while his mother was writing the address. The message being dispatched, she said to them, Why can't you both go after the Marquis? Is he so very far off? 12 hours by post at the very most, replied the Duke. And I cannot know where he is. I ought not to tell you, but I am convinced he will now have no more secrets from you. Happiness induces confidence. My son, returned the Marchioness, you alarm me seriously. Perhaps your brother is here sick, and you are hiding it from me as you did at Serval. He is worse even. You make me believe he is away because he isn't able to be up. No, no, cried Diana, laughing. He is not here. He is not sick. He is abroad. He is travelling. He is sad, perhaps. But he is going to be happy now, and he did not start without some hope of mollifying you. The Duke solemnly assured his mother that his wife was telling the truth. Well, my children, resumed the Marchioness, still uneasy, I wish I could know you were with him. How shall I say it? He has never been ill, but that I have suspected it, or at least felt a peculiar uneasiness. I was conscious of this at Serval, exactly at the period when he was so ill without my knowledge. I see that what you describe coincides with a fearful night which I passed then. Well, today, this morning, I was alone, and I had what I may call a waking dream. I saw the Marquis pale, wrapped in something white, a shroud perhaps, and I heard in my ear his voice, his own voice saying, Mother. Heavens, what fancies you torment yourself with, said the Duke. I don't torment myself willingly, and I let my presentiments comfort me, for I want to tell you the whole. For an hour past I have known that my son is well, but he has been in danger today. He has suffered, or it may have been an accident. Remember now the day and the hour. There you must go, said the Duchess to her husband. I don't believe a word of all this, but we must reassure your mother. You shall go with him, said the Marchioness. I don't want my gloomy notions, which after all are perhaps morbid and nothing else, to give you the first annoyance of your married life. And leave you alone with these ideas? They will all vanish as soon as I see you going after him. The Marchioness insisted. The Duchess ordered a light trunk, and 2 hours afterwards she was travelling by post with her husband through Tulle and Aurillac, on the way to Le Puy. The Duchess knew the secret of her brother-in-law. She was ignorant of the mother's name, but aware of the existence of the child. The Marquis had authorised the Duke to have no secrets from his wife. At 6 in the morning they reached Polignac. The first face which attracted Diana's notice was that of Didier. She was impressed, as Caroline had been, with a sudden impulse of tenderness towards this dear little creature, who captivated all hearts. While she was looking at him and petting him, the Duke inquired for the pretended Monsieur Bernier. My dear, said he to his wife, coming back, my mother was right. Some accident has happened to my brother. He went away yesterday morning for a few hours' ramble over the mountain, but has not returned yet. The people here are uneasy about him. Do they know where he went? Yes, it is beyond Le Puy. The post will carry us so far, and I can leave you there. I shall take a horse and a guide, for there is no road passable for carriages. We will take 2 horses, said the Duchess. I'm not tired a bit. Let us start. An hour after the intrepid Diana, lighter than a bird, was galloping up the slope of the Gagenais, and laughing at her husband's anxiety about her. At 9 o'clock in the morning they were swiftly passing through Lantriac, to the great wonderment of the townspeople. alighting soon at the Payrac Lannion domicile, to the equally great disgust of the village innkeeper. The family were at a table in the little workshop. The wanderers had returned the night before, after some slight detention, but without accident. The Marquis, weary but not sick, had accepted the hospitality of Payrac's son, who lived near by. Caroline had slept delightfully in her little room. She was helping Justine to wait upon the men of the house, that is, the Marquis and the two Payracs. Radiant with happiness, she went back and forth, now waiting on the rest, and now seating herself opposite Monsieur de Villemer, who let her have her own way, watching her with delight, as if to say, I permit this now, but how I shall repay all these attentions by and by. What an outburst of joy and surprise filled Payrac's house at the appearance of the travellers. The two brothers gave each other a long hugging. Diana embraced Caroline, calling her sister. They spent an hour talking over everything by snatches, extravagantly, without comprehending one another, without feeling sure they were not all dreaming. The Duke was almost famished, and found Justine's dishes excellent, for she prepared another plentiful breakfast, while Caroline assisted her, laughing and weeping at the same time. Diana was in a wildly venturesome mood, and wanted to undertake seasoning the dishes, to her husband's great dismay. At last they seriously resumed their respective explanations and recitals. The Marquis began by sending off a courier to Le Puy, with a letter for his mother, whose anxiety and strange presentiments they had mentioned the first thing. They shed no tears on quitting the Payracs, for these good people had promised to come to the wedding. The next day they had reached Mauveroche again, with Didier, whom the Marquis placed in his mother's lap. She had been prepared for this by her son's letter. She loaded the child with caresses, and restoring him to Caroline's arms, she said, My daughter, you accept, then, the task of making us all happy. Take my blessing 1,000 times over, and if you would keep me here a long while, never leave me again. I have done you much harm, my poor angel, but God has not allowed it to last long, for I should have died from it sooner than you. The Marquis and his wife passed the rest of the bright season at Mauveroche, and a few autumnal days at Serval. This place was very dear to them, and in spite of the pleasure of meeting their relatives again in Paris, it was not without an effort that they tore themselves away from a nook consecrated by such memories. The marriage of the Marquis astounded no one. Some approved, others disdainfully predicted that he would repent this eccentricity, that he would be forsaken by all reasonable people, that his life was a ruin, a failure. The Marchioness came near suffering a little from these remarks. Madame d'Arglade pursued Diana, Caroline, and their husbands with her hatred, but everything fell before the Revolution of February, and people had to think of other matters. The Marchioness was terribly frightened, and thought it expedient to seek refuge at Serval, where she was happy in spite of herself. The Marquis, just as his anonymous book was about to appear, postponed its publication to a more quiet period. He was unwilling to strike the sufferers of the day. Blessed with love and family joys, he is not impatient for glory. The old Marchioness is now no more. Feeble in body and far too active in mind, her days have been numbered. She passed away in the midst of her children and grandchildren, blessing them all without knowing she was leaving them, conscious of bodily infirmities, but preserving her intellectual force and natural kindliness to the last, and laying plans, as most invalids do, for the next year. The Duke is growing quite fleshy in his prosperity, but is still good-humoured, handsome, and active enough. He lives in great luxury, but without extravagance, referring everything to his wife, who governs him and keeps him on his good behaviour, with rare tact and admirable judgment, notwithstanding the indulgent spoiling of her fondness for him. We would not assert that he has never thought of deceiving her, but she has contrived to counteract his fancies without letting him suspect it, and her triumph, which still endures, proves once more that there are sometimes wit and power enough in the brain of a girl of 16 to settle the destiny, and that in the best possible way, of a professed profligate. The Duke, still wonderfully good-natured and somewhat weak, finds more delight than one would think in giving over his skilfully planned treacheries toward the fair sex, and in going to sleep without further remorse on the pillow of comfortable propriety. The Marquis and the new Marchioness de Villemer now pass 8 months of the year at Serval, always occupied, we cannot say with one another, because they are so united that they think together and answer each other before the question is asked, but with the education of their children, who are all sprightly and intelligent. Monsieur de G. is dead. Madame de G. has been forgotten. Didier is formally recognised by the Marquis as one of his children. Caroline no longer remembers that she is not his mother. Madame Hodebert is established at Serval. All her children are brought up under the united care of the Marquis and Caroline. The sons of the Duke, petted more, are not so intelligent or so strong, but they are amiable and full of precocious graces. The Duke is an excellent father, and is astonished, though quite needlessly, to find that his children are already so large. The pay racks have been loaded with gifts. Last year Urbain and Caroline went back to visit them, and this time they climbed, under a fine sunrise, the silvery peak of Mazenc. They also wanted to see once more the poor cabin, where, in spite of the Marquis and his liberality, nothing is changed for the better. But the father has bought land and thinks himself wealthy. Caroline seated herself with pleasure by the miserable hearth, where she had seen at her feet for the first time the man with whom she would have willingly shared a hut in the Cevennes, and forgetfulness of the whole world. The end. End of chapter 26. End of the Marquis de Villemer by George Sand. Translated by Ralph Keeler.